You want us to have the camera on now, or shall we switch off the camera?
You can keep it on, but just the microphone off, okay, please.
Okay.
I think that we can start. It's 2 minutes past and people are still joining. My name is George Petihakis, and together with René Garello, we are the co-chairs of Ocean Best Practices System. On behalf of the steering committee, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for being with us today, even though we understand that for some of you it might be very early or very late in the day. The objective of this 8th Ocean Best Practice System workshop is to facilitate the cross-cutting primary role of best practice in operational oceanography by promoting dialogues across science and technology. In the era that we are now of digital twins for the ocean, the need of best practices is fundamental for a more interoperable and reliable use of ocean data, for the evolution of the worldwide observing network from the deep ocean to the coast, and for dealing with complex forecasting systems. The ultimate goal for satisfying this need is to provide standards and tools for developing new solutions for marine conservation, for prediction and monitoring, for a sustainable ocean environment and a sustainable blue economy. We opened this workshop today, October the 14th, which is the World's Day for Standards, by the way. And so we have devoted a day for standards, highlighting the critical role of international standards in promoting safe trade and innovation. Before we start, I would like first of all to thank Dr. Stefania Celiberti and Dr. Virginie van Dohels-Vogel, the two co-chairs of this workshop, who have worked tirelessly the last couple of months to organize this very important event. Thank you, really both. We have a rich agenda today. And right after I give a short presentation of approximately 10 minutes, we will move to Slido. Patricia will take over in order to collect some information from you all, which will help us assess our activities, our current activities, but also better design the future. So just without any further delays, I'll try to share my screen with a short presentation about Ocean Best Practice System. I hope you can all see. And this, as I said, it's on behalf of the Steering Committee of Ocean Best Practices. In terms of, let's give some definitions first. Best practices. This is a bottom-up exercise that evolved from individually developer practices. And if we want to see a transition, we can say that a best practice at some stage becomes endorsed practice and or a standard, where standards are more of top-down processes where a group of experts are gathered to document a set of guidelines. Standards are created through a defined process under a standard organizations. And both of those, both best practice and standards, are essential to ensure consistency and uniformity in how things are done or produced, and generally are applied through the whole value chain. Why use best practice? First of all, it's an efficient use of time. They give collaborative opportunities. They improve systems, the interoperability of systems. They provide data comparability and collatability. They give a greater trust in the data that we produce and streamline regulatory approval and give better successes for funding. What do we expect from a best practice? First of all, trust. They say how often it has been tested, and they are always linked to originators. They follow fair principles. There is a quality of documentation which is understandable and reproducible and affordable. It's a community effort that will not remain the same forever, and it's open to comments and also contributions from new and expert users. And it's often complex to identify what is best, but for this, we've got the maturity model, which I will refer to on it later on. Now, what is the Ocean Best Practice System? It's international project supported by IOC, and it's co-sponsored by ODE and GOOS, with a vision to have agreed and broadly adopted methods across the ocean research, operation, and applications, the full value chain. Original capacities have been a repository, a dedicated part of the Journal of Frontiers in Marine Science, training and user support, and you can see here in this schematic how these are linked, and also expanded capacities like the task teams, an ECOP ambassador program, international annual workshop as the one that we are currently, and a UN Decade program. In terms of the mission, OBPS provides services to the whole value chain, and the mission is to develop and sustain an evolving system which fosters collaboration. It builds consensus and innovation by providing coordinated and global access to best practices and standards across ocean science and application. It facilitates the evolution of methods into best practices through following governance and endorsement. And with GOOS, OBPS supports this evolution, conversion, and endorsement, as I will be showing later on. We're talking about the whole the whole value chain, from data to models, applications, and we want a global recognition. In terms of where we are now, you can see here that since 2018, we have been expanding, and now today we've got a collection of more than 2,200 records coming from 61 communities. There is a very good, actually, also record in terms of the journal, with a lot of evolving number of particles and readerships. We've got training modules, we've got training courses and video, and we've got a global participation in our workshops. And also we have expanded the steering group participation with people from all over the globe. And now we actually have set it up an advisory board as well. Best practices creation and use is now an expected component of most projects, proposals. I'm sure you know about that. We've got an active ocean best practice community with a global coverage, and we provide training material for those that they want to develop their own best practices, but also we support GOOS international endorsements. In terms of convergence and endorsement, today it's a bit of a challenge to find the applicable best practices for your mission. And for this, we've got convergence, which is a process where existing but fragmented knowledge is converged to create a comprehensive document that will qualify as a best practice. And then we've got endorsement, where is another process where coordination groups and communities approve document as the current standard for their operations. What practice can be installed? First of all, those that have completed a rigorous and transparent community review process. They have successfully used by multiple institutions. They have been approved by the leadership of the relevant network and an expert team or institution. They are fit for purpose. They are available in the OBPS repository. They are updated at relevant timeframes. They address uncertainty and adhere to metadata standards of international data repositories. For those that are interested, you can visit this DOI, where there is a guidance produced by the Ocean Best Practice System. Going from 2024 and beyond, we've got an Ocean Decade program, Ocean Practices. We are participating in several projects. Some of those are listed here. We've got a new task team on ocean governance. And as said, we are working with GOOS on the endorsement process. Also, we are building an Ocean Practice Federated network and Ocean Practices Maturity Model. And just a couple of words on this maturity. This is a recently paper that has been published by our community and where we see different levels. So from the formation of a best practice to an emerging practice to a good practice, a better and a best practice, and all this level for all these level criteria. Our roadmap is to become a global, sustained, and trusted hub of ocean know-how, expand our work with developing nations, especially remote regions and indigenous people, for example, in Africa, in the Arctic and South Pacific, to motivate and focus a global conservation around practices, encourage organizations to endorse what is best for them, harmonize metadata and structures, promote federated network of methodological management system, and synergize best practices and standards. And what is now on the table is that this is international student competition. So where as part of our OBPS ambassador program, OBPS is launching its first international student competition today, which is aiming at raising ocean awareness, but also inspiring future ocean professionals how to create and share best practices of different ocean activities. So students are asked to think about best practices and write an essay and make a video to one of those 4 topics: ocean climate solutions, marine life and ecosystem, ocean pollution and blue ocean economy. And in this QR, it will take you to the full flyer, and please share this information within your networks. Cora, who is responsible for this action, is in the audience, and she will be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And with this, some key references on the slides above. It has been a very short presentation. Of course, OBPS is much more, and you can find some information on these references. And with this, that's finished. Thank you very much. Stop sharing. The next session is, as I said, on a Slido, where I'll ask Patricia. Patricia is the new member, is a Ocean Best Practice Project Manager, recently working with us. And in this Slido, as I said, we want to have your opinion on a couple of questions that will help us to design our future. Patricia.
Thank you very much, George. So please, I'll give a minute for everyone to join the Slido. You can also find a link on the chat that I have just placed for you to reach there, or otherwise you can scan the QR code or enter on the page and use this code. So then I will be showing all the questions, and we will be able to see the results live for everyone's information. And at the end of the week, we will also gather some statistics, and we'll do another quick poll where we will use your information and your feedback on how the workshop went. So I will start with the first question. Have you previously heard about OBPS? Just remember to save after each of the questions. You need to save in order to get the answers in the screen. Okay, I move to the next question. Which best describe your role within the ocean data value chain? Okay. Next question. What career stage are you at? Wait. Okay. What triggered you to attend this OBPS workshop? This is an open text question. Okay, I will move to the next question, although please feel free to keep answering because this information will be very, very useful. How often do you refer to documented practices in your work? So remember, you need to save the answer in order to get it here in the screen. Not sure why. Yes. Okay, next question. What area subject of ocean science is your practice covering? This is an open text answer. Okay, we're reaching the end. Which step in the documentation of practices do you think needs to have more support from OBPS? So this is a ranking, so you can order them. Okay, and we go to the last question. How can OBPS improve collaboration between scientists, policymakers, industry, and local communities on ocean best practices? So you can take your time here to answer, and then I can now give the floor to George so we can start on time for panel 1. Thank you everyone for answering the questions.
Thanks, Patricia, and we are doing great on time.
Okay, sorry, wait a
Thanks
few
lot.
seconds. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So we move to panel 1, which today we have the pleasure to have with us 3 distinguished keynote speakers. The first is my good friend and colleague Joaquin Tintoret. Joaquin is director of the Spanish large-scale infrastructure SOSIB, the Balearic Islands. It's a coastal ocean observing system with multi-platform ocean observing and forecasting research infrastructure that is included in the Spanish large-scale infrastructure map since 2014. SOSIB offers access to its research infrastructures and is actively involved in European and international initiatives. SOSIB team, through its multi-platform and integrated approach, responds to state-of-the-art science priorities and is co-leading the development of regional digital twins of the ocean, which are fit for purpose to stakeholder needs and provide decision supports. SOSIB is strongly committed to the development of the ocean best practice system and strives to enhance ocean integration as a way forward towards an effective transformation in oceanography, to become more effective as a community responding to the global challenges that our society is facing, and in particular relate to the role of the ocean in climate change, biodiversity loss, and in more general terms, achieving a real and effective sustainability for future generations. Joaquin will speak today about the current state of ocean knowledge, the new initiatives, and the challenges that we are facing. Joaquin, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I hope you can see my slides.
Can you put it? Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah, that's
okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for the invitation and for allowing me to give this presentation today. And what I want to present today somehow is the vision from an integrated multi-platform and ocean observing system that is also involved in best practices to try to advance on innovative solutions and effective governance. And the subtitle I have thought about is Transforming Oceanography, Regional Digital Twins Opportunities through Interoperability and Open Science. I'm particularly happy about being able to contribute to today, looking at the subtitle from the workshop, Dialogues Across Science and Technology for Innovative Solutions and Effective Governance. The main idea of the presentation really is to contribute to those dialogues. The only thing is that I would add science, technology, and society to be sure that we address solutions that are really innovative and that are effectively fit for purpose, and that allow us to advance towards a global governance. So I will be, this is the outline of my presentation. I will focus on trying to work towards one goal. I think this is essential, and I will try to explain why. That doesn't mean that other goals are not important. That means that I think we have to be selective and that we have to try to identify one goal. We also need to address and understand the changes in our environment and think whether we are adapting to these changes. How is it that we are addressing this goal from the perspective of a multi-platform integrated and observing system? It's really trying to connect the pieces from an n-dimensional puzzle. We are on the good track, but we are still with fragmented knowledge, reductionism, and not all is well aligned. So that brings me to the third point of the presentation, the relevance of data and resources, interoperability and open data as pathways for breaking down silos and more efficient response for stakeholders and enhanced dialogues, as the title of the workshop indicates. And then I will end up talking about the opportunities. I do believe that it's the right time for the ocean for those effective dialogues that we're talking. Regional digital twins are an opportunity, and we have an enabling environment for real transformation change as requested by UN Decade, but it's not a panacea, so we have to be careful, and I believe that effective integration is needed. So those are the four major elements of my presentation. And let me just then quickly start. One main goal, climate change. Global warming is really ocean warming. Those are slides that are well known. I will not even describe them, but we are in an emergency situation. Action and transformation is required, and we all have to work together to really address this emergency situation. Let me just here just show you a slide that I have borrowed from my good friend from Mercator, Alain Arnaud, that shows the Mediterranean daily sea surface temperature anomaly from 82 to 23. And what you see here is that the 2003 anomaly, I will do it again. The 2003 was a very strong anomalous year that you see here appearing right now. What you see today is that the anomaly that was clearly appearing in 2003 is right now the norm. So 20 years have passed, and the strong anomaly in 2003 is nowadays the normal situation. So let me just continue insisting on something well known, but I do like this Spielhaus projection. It shows one ocean, connectivity, scales. It also shows limits. It somehow talks or allow us to talk about sustainability. And all this is linked together, and all this to me is also linked to best practices, and I will be able in this presentation to show you about this. But before this, I want to just quickly stress that we are and have been in the last 4 or 5 years addressing and seeing major changes in different components. Changes in science, from ocean observation and data availability, with 2 clear paradigm shifts from single platform observations to multi-platform observations. And as my good friend John Delaney used to say, is a single ship can only be in one place at one time, and we need to be in multiple places in multiple times. John has been repeating this for now more than 10 years. I think right now, all this is still true, but I think we have to be more ambitious and request and guarantee the interoperability between the different platforms and sensors. And I think this is the key element nowadays, the interoperability of all those assets. And I think in this, OBPS, GOOS, IOD, etc., are good examples of significant advances, but there's still a lot to work on, as I will be able to show you. There are also changes in concepts like scientific excellence. And here we have just some examples from Nature editorials, and from Leiden to Dora to Coara, etc. Those changes are impacting the funding agencies, and this is a clear element for the transformation that I believe is needed. There are also changes in society and international frame. Here we have some of them, and a nice quote from Richard Spinrad before he became NOAA boss in 2016 that I keep using and repeating because I think it is very relevant now that everybody's talking about blue economy. Then with all this, we have a major scientific challenge when studying the ocean and climate change, which is ocean scale and interactions, as well known in this diagram from Shelton. Here, what I will just stress is the need to combine the different scales, and the need to combine the different scales is directly related to the need to work through essential ocean variables as defined by GOOS and other international agencies. So I think those are essential elements that I want to put forward, and I will now just mention that at SOCIB, at the Balearic Islands Coastal Observing System, what we are is a regional research infrastructure, a national Spanish multi-platform observing and forecasting system that runs from the near shore of the beaches to the open sea and from events to climate. Those are the different platforms, sensors and data that we are using. And we focus really since the beginning on interoperability. Why interoperability? Because basically it allows something that we all know in this frame. It allows systems to talk to each other in real time or in quasi-real time. And what I'm more interested in addressing here today is that this is allowing us to reduce data silos, to reduce silos from glider teams working on their own, separated from Argo profiler experts, from drifting, buoys, etc. So one key element at SOCIB from the beginning is that we are all trying to work together in a global idea, in a regional component with co-design, and you have here some of the major elements of what we are really doing at SOCIB in the Balearic Islands in the international context. This is SOCIB integrated approach to ocean observing, from data to data repositories to end users, and how is it that we are combining all those elements. We focus on ocean and coastal 4D variability, focusing really on mesoscale, shell slope exchanges, etc. The region of the ocean, the scale of the ocean where we find a maximum of kinetic energy that is well known. And with this, what we do at SOCIB is to try to work from data providers to the repository, to the data repository, and to the end users, as you can see in these slides, just depicting some elements of the glider component at SOCIB. But there's one clear element I'd like to stress from this slide I borrowed from Mike Schmidt from CIUs, and that there is a major gap between data providers and data users. And this is also a clear element that I want to stress, and that is linked to the transformation that is very strongly needed. At SOCIB, we work towards fair data. Everybody's talking about fair data, and I do not always see quantitative numbers around fair data or real and solid evaluations of the fairness of data. At SOCIP, we are striving to do that. We are not succeeding, but we're working on this. And we succeeded in having the Core Trust Seal data repository, which I think is one of the ways certainly to move forward. The data repository at SOCIP is characterized by its interoperability and the fact that we disseminate our data and user interfaces. We have 3 different user interfaces to support different use cases, from operational data through the thread server, the data catalog, or the API for machine-to-machine. And what is relevant here, and what I want to stress here, is that SOCIP data repository is fully aligned with the ocean best practices. We have been supporting open science and society engagement, and this is a way for transformation. Here on the right, what you have is the open science 12 elements that the European Open Science Cloud is proposing. And what is interesting is that at SOCIP, we are doing reasonably well in 9 out of 12 of those open science elements. There's still a lot to work, but we're doing reasonably okay. And I do believe that open science and interoperability are key elements for this society engagement that is kind of a prerequisite for the transformation. Just very quickly, some quick highlights on some science and society elements that with this integrated approach and with this interoperability and open science, we are able to do at SOCIP. This is the Calypso program, US ONR-funded DRI in the Mediterranean, where we have been working for the last years on vertical motions. And what is very relevant is that we have been able to capture extremely intense capture, meaning observing and modeling extremely intense vertical motions in the upper layer. Here you have a quick animation of the initial work done with 2 gliders, then with 8 gliders, 2 ships, Argo profilers, etc. And with all this multi-platform and integrated approach, we were able to really address this variability in the open ocean and to mark a major step forward in scientific knowledge. This is in terms of science, but we are also active at SOCIP in really addressing applications for society related to blue economy. And here you have some decision support tool exemplars associated with different stakeholders and sectors from society, from SOCIP. This is just one example related to marine heat waves, which I will not go into this, but all the information is on the web, and there's a paper behind, of course. This is also another good element and clear element related to climate change effects in coastal areas. Another clear element is we are trying to extend our observing system to animal-borne instruments, and this is an example with sea turtles. So what you see here in the lower panel is the glider initially following the sea turtle and finally not being able to follow it. And here on the right, excuse me, what you see is the dives of the sea turtles at the depths of the deep chlorophyll maximum as depicted by the gliders. So those are just some examples of science and society elements from SOCIP. I don't want to finish those examples or those ideas without highlighting the importance of science and society, ocean literacy, which is also a key element in a place like the Balearic Islands, where we are fixed. This is basically a summary of what SOCIP brings: infrastructure, science, stakeholders, data service, data science, and advice. But all this is good, but it's certainly not enough. And I do believe that following what the UN Decade has been pushing, and we have been saying this together also at SOCIP for some time now, we need a real transformation in ocean observation. We need a real change in ocean integration for enhanced science and responding to society challenges. To be more clear about what I mean by ocean integration, let me just follow with the next slide.
Joaquin, we cannot see or hear anything.
Okay, that's really the integration that I believe we need. The integration as in music, in an orchestra, where we're talking about the harmony on top of the different elements and from ecosystems to ecosystems. I believe we are on a good track, and we started working on this in the EuroSea project with a number of different authors, where we started working for these transformative organizational changes, building collective impact organizations, reaching sustainability, and promoting a culture shift. I think, as I said, we are on a good track. And I do believe that the regional digital twins and digital twins of the ocean present unique opportunities, excellent opportunities to really bring together this knowledge and integrate it, responding to society needs. I always like to talk about this and show this sparkly fountain from Terry McConnell. The digital twins are the visible part of a complex digital ecosystem. We are working on this plumbing system, but there is one goal, which in this case is very nicely depicted by the fountain. I think it's a nice example from Terry. At the same time, I also see a lot of enthusiasm for digital twins, which I share, but they are not panaceas. So I also want to call for some cautious and on going beyond panaceas. And I think these comments from Elinor Ahlström should be really taken into consideration. At SOCIP, we have been working, as you've seen, on those key components, but we have some facilities and some capabilities, but we have identified clearly some needs for the near future that we still need to address and that we are working on. This is just an example from Miguel Charcos, one of our key elements at SOCIP, on the regional digital twin architecture that we are working. The key element is now to add metrics to each one of those components and be sure that they are all connected towards the common goal. That's the SOCIP multidisciplinary team that makes all this possible. And this is the summary, which is to me the important key message that I would like you to convey. It's the right time for dialogues, as requested in this session. Indeed, the right times for dialogues where OBPS and others have contributed, and we need to advance towards this transformation in ocean sciences. There have been changes in science that I have been outlining, and the digital twins are clear opportunities, but not panaceas. Regional ocean observing systems provide possible pathways for the transformation through critical mass, mission-oriented, society engagement. Most of the 5 components of the digital twins are found in the regional ocean observing systems. So in summary, 2 major conclusions and take-home messages. We need to enhance the ecosystem that favor scientific excellence, but with impact on society, responding to clear and well-established common goals, building trust. It was mentioned by George at the beginning. Building trust is essential, and effective synchronization and alignment of all the components. I think OBPS is a good example of that. Is an example that we are on a good track, but there's still a lot to do. And in particular, there's still a lot to do because we need leadership and integration. We need to break down the silos. And also for this, we need the committed from funding agencies, from organizations, research organizations, from nations for real and effective transformation as called by the UN Ocean Decade. And I thank you very, very much. Those are the SOCIP partners that make all this possible. And thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Joaquin, for the very, very interesting presentation. Joaquin will be staying with us and with the plenary, so it will be possible to answer questions. There have been 2 questions which are more general in the Q&A that you can see, Joaquin. you can possibly answer, but there are also, and we will have, just to say, the last keynote is about the UN Ocean Decade, so we will learn the recent developments and the way forward. Thanks again, Joaquin. Moving to our next speaker, Dr. Srinivas Kumar Tumala. Sorry, Srini, if I haven't pronounced yet correct your name, is the director of the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, the INCOIS. And he holds a PhD in marine science and made impactful contributions to the field of operational oceanography, spanning ocean observations, data, applied research, modeling, services, and capacity development. He's working at the INCOIS of the Ministry of Earth Science since 2001, and he was responsible for implementing several important projects of societal relevance, including the potential fishing zone advisories, ocean state forecast, coastal multi-hazard early warnings, etc. Post the 2004 tsunami, he coordinates successful establishment of the Indian Tsunami Early Warning System as a multi-institutional project. This early warning center based at INCOIS is identified as one of the tsunami service providers under the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning and Mitigation System, which is a framework operating under the IOC. Between October 2016 and October 2020, he worked with IOC as head of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning and Mitigation System Secretariat in Perth. And during this time, he was instrumental in strengthening the regional tsunami early warning system in active collaboration with 28 member states towards global harmonization of tsunami watch operations and implementation of the Tsunami Ready Community Recognition Program. Having started his scientific career with a brief stint at the Indian Space Research Organization, Dr. Tumala is currently the director of INCOIS. He also serves as vice chair of the IOC for the Region 4, co-chair of the IOC WMO Joint Collaborative Board, chair of the Ocean Decade Tsunami Program Science Committee, and chair of the IOC Working Group on Tsunamis and Other Hazards. The title of the presentation is Ocean Value Chain Observations to Services. Dear Srini, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George. I hope you're able to see my presentation and hear me. And
yes,
I'd like
fine.
Yeah,
yes.
I'd like to start by thanking OBPS for inviting me to give this talk. As you would see, and like you mentioned, I'll be talking a bit about the ocean value chain, starting from observations right until down to services, and then I'll be talking a bit about the societal part of it, which I'm glad that I'm speaking after good friend Joachim. You'll see that a lot of the language that we speak, it's so similar. Talking about the ocean value chain, starting right from observations to data systems to modeling and prediction systems to the services. So I'll actually try to detail a bit on the Indian experience on this end-to-end value chain, talking about the kind of services we provide to some of our end users, actually, the societal part of it. Now, I'll not even start to describe this slide because I know the audience here is well aware of why oceans are important. But what I did want to mention is actually, the Indian Ocean, there are kind of societal needs that we need to address. There are lots of, countries with rapidly growing blue economies, dependency on, oceans, and then building their blue economy frameworks. Agrarian, economies, again, which are very dependent on the weather and climate, which are, again, in turn dependent on the oceans, of course. And then fisheries is a huge activity in the maritime Indian Ocean rim countries. And then the populations are extremely vulnerable to weather and climate hazards. And looking at the science again, Indian Ocean is very important in the sense that the heat, 1/4 of the global heat uptake happens in the Indian Ocean region, rapid rise in sea level, rapid expansion of OMZs, and so on and so forth. And then coming to the operational aspects of it, we need actually kind of improvement of surface fluxes for running our models, the ocean data assimilation systems, seasonal to subseasonal forecasting systems, all of which are dependent on the kind of ocean observations and our access to ocean data sets. So This is a very classic picture from the GOOS 2030 strategy, which actually very clearly identifies that entire ocean value chain, starting right from observations, satellite, to in situ observing systems, to data management systems, forecast models, analysis and forecasting systems, the ocean models, coupled models, wave models, and so on. And then coming right down to the applications, where it could be applications dealing with policy, climate policy, and so on, or very near-term kind of operational services that could help with, kind of say tsunami warnings and storm surge warnings, or coastal sea level kind of inundation, any hazard that could cause a coastal inundation, or ecosystem services. Now, that's the kind of global framework that we have been all together. A lot of people on this panel and within the webinar and outside have been working on those kind of systems in different countries and different institutions. Now, what I would like to present here is what we do here, a bit about what is done in India at INCOIS, at my institution, which is the National Center for Ocean Information Services, which actually does this niche job of connecting the research, ocean research, to the needs of the community. And then we've kind of worked bottoms up. What is the kind of information that different communities need, be it fishing communities or coastal states, that's the provinces or the Met agencies or the strategic agencies like navies, coast guards, energy companies, ports and harbors, and so on. And the academic institutions work backwards and see what is the kind of information that they would need and what is possible through science and what observations are required to actually develop the science required to deliver those services, and so on. So that's one snapshot of remote sensing, in situ observations, satellite oceanography program that we do here at INCOIS that helps with retrieval of geophysical parameters, ocean parameters from satellite data sets, and then the ocean science and modeling, and so on and so forth. I'll get into those services part a bit later, but then as an institutional mechanism, we actually have kind of interrelations with several other national institutions as well as international institutions working as a kind of a framework to deliver these kind of services. And these are the kind of observing systems that we operate together. Again, the global design provided by the GOOS, regionally implemented by programs like the Indian Ocean GOOS, which is a GOOS regional alliances, and then several other networks. There are, national networks such as IMOS, the India's mooring network called Omni, and so on and so forth. So just a snapshot of, observing systems. And INCOIS, my institution, works is the central agency for managing the observing networks. We kind of deploy Argo floats in the Indian Ocean region, the Glider program, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, our sister institutions which helps with the Omni moorings, the radiometers, the tide gauges, and wave rider buoys, the GNSS networks, seismic networks, flux moorings, and so on and so forth. So we operate those networks, and then there are also a series of satellites. India has a satellite called an OceanSat, the third in the series of satellites, which was launched late last year. And then we have access to those data sets that we acquire here at INCOIS, which we use as our base, framework to develop those kind of advisory services. Again, Joachim talked about the data systems. We have we are one of the national oceanographic data centers under the IOC's IOD framework, an Argo regional data center. And then we have procedures where we actually have access to federated databases, which are actually collected by various institutions within the country and then organized at INCOIS. And then we have a system called the Digital Ocean that you're seeing on the right there, which actually helps with archiving the data and then using the data, disseminating the data, and so on. We also work with partners like NOAA to help maintain the Rama moorings. That's the kind of the panel on the bottom right that you're seeing is actually the data sets from Rama, which we actually provide through INCOIS as well as the NDBC websites actually. And a lot of work is now being done on on the data systems using AI and ML, where we actually are using these techniques to kind of bridge gaps in the data in time series data sets or produce maps of, say, for example, a latest publication from INCOIS, wherein we have actually used data sets and AIML to actually produce maps of the PCO2 all across the Indian Ocean. Now, coming to the modeling systems again, we actually have different models that we run, which actually span from the global domain to a regional domain to a very local domain. The ocean different models that actually help us produce different products, like for example, the ocean general circulation models, the wave models, the tsunami models, storm surge models, different kinds of models run at different spatial and temporal scales, which actually take in the forcing data, assimilates the observational data, and then produces several products. And then the products that we generate again span from nowcast to very short-term forecast to long-term, very long-term, decadal, multi-decadal climate kind of forecast. Now, those are the scales that we talked about actually. Very quickly, in a couple of minutes on each slide. So I'm keeping track of my time. So this is on the ecosystem kind of services that we produce from some of our data sets actually. The first one on the top is called a potential fishing zone advisories, where we use sea surface temperature data, chlorophyll data from satellites, model data sets, like for example, forecasts of the mixed layer depth and so on and so forth, to produce maps that can actually be used by fishing community. We have about 800,000 coastal fishermen along the Indian coastline, which use such information to improve their economics of operations. Then the next one that you're seeing out there is actually the marine heat wave alerts, which actually we again use long-term satellite data sets to produce such data. And the top that you see is actually the coral reef bleaching alerts. We actually monitor the status of coral bleaching through in situ observations, and as well as use the satellite data sets to produce, the nowcast of coral bleaching. So that's something. And then we also use satellite data to produce algal bloom information. These are again alerts of eutrophied waters along the coastal areas, which are actually detected using satellite and in situ data. And we are also it's also possible to produce water quality services using in situ buoys, as well as, the models, the biogeochemical models that we have actually, run at INCOIS. So we have about 2 multi-parametric buoys that we run, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, which actually are used to produce these data sets. On the forecasting, ocean forecasting, again, we have about 45 products that we generate every day in and day out operationally. These could be currents, salinity, temperature, mixed layer, and so on and so forth. And then we also produce wave products, again, which actually swells, which are produced in the Southern Ocean, and then they propagate into the North Indian Ocean to cause inundation of the coastal areas. Those are the kind of forecasts that we provide. On the middle panel, what you're seeing is actually information on the marine search and rescue, which we provide to regional and national agencies, which help with search and rescue operations. We use data from our models, the currents, and the kind of winds to produce the probable areas of search and rescue. And on the right, what you're seeing is actually the oil spill forecast again, where there's an interface for the users to put in the lat-long location, and then the type of oil, the quantity of oil, and then the models run at the back end here to produce actually a trajectory of the oil spill. What you're seeing there is the Sri Lanka oil spill. And then on the middle again, that you see is again the forecast that we provide. This is for a cyclone, high wave alerts that are produced due to a cyclone, and then the inundation that they cause at the coastal location. On the right bottom corner, the plots that you're seeing, again, those are data from the model as well as the observations, the wave rider observations. We have about 15 wave rider buoys that are operated that are actually used to validate the models. And then we have also started assimilating a lot of this data into the models so that we can improve their accuracies. Now that's on the climate scale again. So we actually are working again together with several national and international partners on producing analysis of the impact of climate change on ocean indicators. And these ocean indicators, when I say, I mean, like, for example, the sea level rise. How is the sea level going to rise? What about the cyclone intensity and frequency in a climate change scenario? The storm surges, waves, and erosion. the biogeochemistry and ecology. How are these going to change in the next 50 years? Now, this is something that we have actually started working on. And then we also provide products actually on the dipole mode, Indian Ocean dipole, most of you are aware. That's something which we actually also produce as an outlook bulletins. In the middle, what you're seeing is actually, again, where that's an example of a product where we've actually used a lot of data sets from the past 30 years, both satellite and in situ, as well as model simulations, to produce the potential energy and a marine renewable energy estimate for the Indian EEZ. So this is kind of a latest product that we produced that is being used by policymakers to make decisions on, what kind of energy could be, retrieved or, harnessed from which part of the Indian EEZ. We find that there's about 9.5 terawatt hour of energy that comes from about 8 forms. It could be waves, it could be solar, marine winds, tides, and ocean thermal energy, and so on and so forth. Now, coming to the next part is the hazard, again, the multi-hazard part. All of these actually, again, the climate change or the cyclone or episodic events like a tsunami, they cause coastal inundation. So we have a tsunami warning center, which George mentioned while he introduced me, which was set up at INCOIS, provides information on cyclones and storm surges, as well as, we produce multi-hazard vulnerability maps that can help with, making policy decisions for the policymakers, for doing planning on the infrastructure and so on and so forth. One important point here is actually we also work closely with the communities. That actually what you're seeing here is a tsunami ready recognition. This is a program like the weather ready communities, which is being adapted. And then this is an IOC UNESCO program where we are working with the communities to making these warning systems user centric, actually people centric, and then making them prepared. They know so that they know what to do when they get a warning, what are the hazard maps, what are the evacuation routes, and also what you're seeing there actually is a picture of community working on their evacuation maps and routes actually. And then if they meet about 12 indicators, they actually can be recognized as tsunami ready. So this is actually how we reach the communities. There are several methods because the communication challenges are there when you want to reach to actually people outside their mobile networks when they're in the oceans. So we have some technological solutions which we use to reach people, and we use websites and mobile apps and so on and so forth to reach the our user communities and stakeholders. Capacity development happens to be a very important of this end-to-end ocean value chain at every point, starting from observations to data systems through to the products. We need to work with the users. Sometimes the users could be very, not very literate and not very, well-versed with the technologies. But then on the other end of the extreme, we have scientific users who are, on the other end of the spectrum. So we actually have a category 2 center under the UNESCO, which operates under the IOC framework, which is called the International Training Center for Operational Oceanography, which has so far conducted about 100 training programs, training 6,000 people, and then several users on aspects related to operational oceanography there. Now, international frameworks, again, Joachim talked about this, and I'm sure my good friend Enrique will touch upon some of these items which are related to the DCCs and so on. They provide the point here is actually how all of these frameworks help us actually learn from good practices, of course, and then, also dovetail our national programs into what is happening internationally, allow us to work together, be it the Ocean Decade or GOOS regional alliances or the Ocean Decade collaborative centers and so on. So one thing that we get asked as scientists or ocean observing institutions is, what is the benefit of these ocean observations? Of course, ocean observations help us, understand the processes and then, make policy decisions and so on and so forth. They help us with ocean research. But then operational oceanography is something that actually, helps us convince the policymakers and the funding agencies that this is where actually we get a lot of benefit, be it economic benefit or environmental benefit or life-saving kind of actions that we take from, these observations, taking them down to the ocean value chain. Like, for example, we give a tsunami warning, which comes from observations, of course, and the models and so on. That means we are saying valuable lives. We can't put a value to life. But then what I want to say here is, for example, there are about 15 large earthquakes, and then only one produces a tsunami. But then even the remaining 14 events are very important, because the warning system is assessing these events and telling the policymakers and the coastal population that, hey, there is no possibility of a tsunami. We don't need to evacuate. So that's kind of, and evacuation involves a lot of money. Like, for example, for one Philin cyclone in the east coast of India, the amount of expense that is incurred is actually runs into several millions of dollars. And every year you have several cyclones or threats that could create a tsunami, or a storm surge that could create a coastal inundation. You actually need to have this information at the back of our hands to provide a forecast to the public, saying, they either save lives or, save on the economic, impacts. Now, on the environmental part, some of this information that we provide helps in saving time at sea, spending less diesel, and then that means that they are putting less carbon dioxide into the environment. So this is actually a survey that has been done by a National Center for Applied Economic Research. I'll be happy to share, some of those things. This is my last slide. So ocean observations, and then those, their information advisory services play such a critical role. We all need to work together actually to maintain these observation systems, having federated systems that can talk to each other, to produce and provide data, which will be helpful in running these models, validating our products, providing it to the public for policymaking. And all of this is so central to whatever we talk about in the Ocean Decade, such a great program. Alison is going to talk after me, so I'll not even try to labor that bit. But then a lot of countries are coming up with their blue economy policies, which talk about marine spatial planning, fisheries, and tourism and ocean energy and so on. So this becomes very important for all of us to work together on building digital twins and so on and so forth. So I'd like to thank you for your kind attention, for your time. And then I would like to thank all my colleagues at INCOIS and the ministry and broader friends who helped me put together this presentation, and then the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Srini. Exactly on time. Although we don't have time for questions, there is one in the chat, in the Q&A for you that you can answer later. I must admit that it's really impressive, the amount and the variability of services that you have and applications in India, in your portfolio. And personally, I have been really impressed with this cost-benefit analysis, something which is missing from Europe, although a couple of countries are trying to do it, but as a whole in Europe, we don't have such a thing, which would help us a lot to make a strong case in our governments. Thanks a lot. Thanks again. Moving to our last speaker for this first panel, Alison Clausen. Alison is the Deputy Global Coordinator of the UN Ocean Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development at UNESCO, IOC. In this role, she coordinates diverse elements of Ocean Decade implementation and recently played a central role in the 2020 Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona last April, in which over 2,600 participants debated the future priorities of the Ocean Decade. Her current work is focusing on the implementation of the outcomes of the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference, including a focus on ensuring engagement of small islands, developing states, and least developed countries in the work of the Ocean Decade. She joined IOC as a program specialist back in 2019, with over 25 years professional experience in program and project development and management in the areas of marine conservation, marine policy, and climate change adaptation. Before joining IOC, she was based in Madagascar, where she worked throughout the Western Indian Ocean region for the World Bank, and most recently as the Regional Director for the Madagascar and Western Indian Ocean program of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Prior to that, she lived in Vietnam, where she worked through Southeast Asia for a range of development banks, UN agencies, and NGO partners. Alison will present the very important for us all UN Ocean Decade framework, as we also heard by our previous speakers. Alison, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, George, and thanks to the entire OBPS team for the invitation to speak here today. And you gave me a very nice lead into what I'm going to speak about, which is really focusing on the outcomes of the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference, and then
Alison, can you,
yes.
sorry for interrupting, can you please put it on presentation mode?
Oh, sorry. Yes, let me see how I can do that. Sorry, I'm working on.
That's presenters.
That.
Okay, that's fine.
That's
right.
fine. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. So let's jump in and start off with this first slide, which I'm sure many of you will have seen before, but just in case there are some participants who are newer to the Ocean Decade, this slide really sort of sums up the framework within which the decade is constructed, and of course the framework that we're going to be using to implement the results coming out of the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference as we move forward into the second half of the Ocean Decade. So I think some of the key things to remember here, obviously there's the vision statement for the Ocean Decade, the science we need for the ocean we want, although I would say that we are increasingly talking about both the science and the knowledge we need for the ocean we want. And this is really trying to increase the visibility and the recognition of alternative knowledge systems within the Ocean Decade as very important pieces of the decade. And so that's something we've been focusing on a lot, and that will continue to be a priority moving forward. The mission statement, of course, very familiar to most of you. Transformative ocean science solutions for sustainable development, connecting people and our ocean. So this mission statement really tries to draw out the different facets and principles of the Ocean Decade, including the fact that we're talking about ocean science and ocean knowledge that is transformative because of some of the elements and approaches of co-design, of co-delivery, the way that we're thinking about and really ensuring that there's inclusivity, equity, diversity in the generation of ocean science and in the use of ocean science. We're of course talking about ocean science that is very solutions focused. That is a key part of the decade, that it is the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And finally, that the decade still has a very strong focus on behavior change, whether that be individual behavior change or institutional behavior change. So really trying to understand some of the drivers and some of the triggers that are needed to create that behavior change. So that's the vision and mission statement. The action framework of the decade itself is really focused around the 10 Ocean Decade challenges. And just a reminder of these challenges here, because they're sort of the central pieces around which a lot of the recent review and refinement of the decade has been undertaken, and really are going to continue to be anchor points moving forward for collective impact in the decade as we look at the outcomes of the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference, and we continue to see how we can implement and really catalyze collective impact and action around these challenges. And so we have the 5 challenges that are focused around knowledge and solutions, ranging from marine pollution through to the ocean climate nexus. We have challenges around infrastructure that you can see in the orange box here, which have a strong focus on ocean observations and digital and data sharing infrastructure, but also look at infrastructure that is being generated through the decade, particularly in relation to early warning systems. And then what we call our foundational challenges, which are some of the challenges around capacity development, transfer of technology, and of course, behavior change. So that's the framework for the decade. It's been with us since 2021, and it's still sort of our guidebook in terms of how the decade rolls out. But in terms of where we're up to and the current status of the decade, this is our our most recent snapshot of some of the very high-level key performance indicators that we keep track of and that we report on regularly in meetings such as this. So the first column is around the portfolio of endorsed Ocean Decade actions. And you can see we currently have 56 global programs that are working in the decade. This number is increasing steadily, slowly but steadily. And increasingly, we're working with the Decade Advisory Board to ensure that the new programs that are coming on are really filling some of the niches and some of the empty spots in the decade. And that we're aiming as much as possible to avoid duplication, but really looking to strengthen the portfolio of existing programs that already exist. We have nearly 450 projects, which are the national, the regional, the subnational initiatives that sit underneath those programs. And that is a number that is actually continuing to grow very quickly as our 56 programs continue to build out and evolve and bring on new partners. And so these projects are helping really to reinforce the diversity, both thematically, but also geographically of those programs. Those programs and projects are now being led by partners from 70 countries. This is also a number that's increasing, which is good news, but this number does hide some continued discrepancies or some continued gaps in leadership of decade actions from small island developing states and from least developed countries. And that has been a persistent challenge since the outset of the decade, and something that we're continuing to work on with capacity development and other initiatives to try and redress to get better geographical diversity in the leadership of the Ocean Decade actions. You can see there in the middle column some of the key statistics around regional and national coordination. We now have 39 national decade committees. Again, this is a good number, but considering that IOC UNESCO, which obviously coordinates implementation of the decade, has 150 member states, we still have quite some way to go in terms of getting increased coverage for national decade committees. But we do have a very strong emerging network or growing network of decade collaborative centers, decade coordination offices, and these are really the decentralized coordination hubs, so the regional and coordination hubs that work very closely with the decade coordination unit to implement the decade, support implementation of the decade, and make the connection to the decade actions and to partner networks. And I see Enrique Alvarez from the Ocean Prediction DCC is going to speak today as well. And of course, the Ocean Prediction DCC is one of the key members of this network of decade collaborative centers and coordination offices. And then you can see some of the engagement and outreach numbers on the far right-hand side of the slide. These are also growing as we continue to engage new heads of state in the Ocean Decade Alliance, new philanthropic members of the Foundations Dialogue, as well as just general engagement and outreach, which of course had a great boost after the Barcelona conference. So looking at, those are sort of some of the KPIs, but looking at this in a more conceptual way, as we were putting together the sort of the outcomes from the Barcelona conference, which I'll get to in a bit more detail, we wanted to produce a slide which highlighted some of the key successes and remaining challenges in the Ocean Decade, because this, I think, provides a bit of a framework for some of our thinking about where we're going to be really focusing our efforts over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And so looking through the different results from the monitoring and evaluation, the different discussions, et cetera, that have been held in Barcelona and around Barcelona, we see that we have made significant achievements in the Ocean Decade. There has been a significant mobilization of diverse sectors of society. There is certainly an increased awareness of the role of ocean science in sustainable development. There is science that is entirely relevant and timely and transformative, that is already being used to inform global, regional, national policy frameworks. And there is also increased recognition, as I said at the outset, of the role that alternative knowledge systems can play in contributing to the global ocean governance and policy landscape. Now, the decade has not achieved all of this alone. We're not working in a vacuum, but we do believe that the decade has contributed to these successes. But there remain challenges. There are remaining critical knowledge gaps. And these are some knowledge gaps that are both persistent in that we have always had these gaps and we haven't yet been able to fill them. And we also have emerging gaps. And some of these emerging gaps are obviously very strongly related to changing climate, changing socio-ecological conditions, and they're changing our needs for knowledge. We also have gaps in terms of having clearer processes for how policy and user needs can trigger co-design and co-delivery of science and knowledge. We have gaps and challenges in support and full engagement of small island developing states and least developed countries. And we have persistent gaps in investment in financing for ocean science, and the way that funders, whether they be national funders, whether they be multilateral partners, are thinking about ocean science as an investment and as a budget need, as opposed to project-based funding. So what are we doing with all this information about some of the successes and the challenges? Well, obviously, the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference that was held in Barcelona, and I know many of you were there, was critical to looking at these successes and challenges and really trying to set a way forward for how the decade as a whole can start to address them. So just as a reminder, the conference was held in Barcelona from the 10th to 12th of April. And the key pieces of discussion and dialogue at the conference were based on the results of the Vision 2030 process. And I know from seeing some of the names of attendees, many of you were involved in these, either in the expert working groups or in reviewing white papers and providing comments. But the Vision 2030 process was based or structured around those 10 Ocean Decade challenges that I mentioned in the beginning slide. And it really tried to set a proposal or suggestions or an idea of what the strategic ambition for each of those 10 Ocean Decade challenges would look like to 2030. And then based on those white papers, we prepared a zero draft of what we called at the time the outcomes report, which looked at the strategic ambition for each of the 10 Ocean Decade challenges, but also looked across the Ocean Decade challenges and looked at some of the cross-cutting challenges and needs and priorities to create a strong enabling environment to really be able to implement the science and knowledge priorities. And so all of this work went on, the background preparation before the Barcelona conference. Then there were numerous discussions within the conference in the parallel sessions. At the outset of the conference, the Barcelona statement was released, which really tried to pick up some of the key points coming out of the discussion in the conference itself. And then following the conference, all of this information and all of this discussion and dialogue was taken to the Decade Advisory Board and was also taken to the Executive Council of IOC, which took place in June, and has been further refined and distilled and consolidated into this report, which you can see here, which was released just last Thursday. So it is very, very new. And I really encourage you all to download it and have a look through it, because this is really, as it says, the consolidated outcomes of the Vision 2030 process, taking that whole process over the last year through the Barcelona conference and trying to come up with what we hope is a relatively succinct set of actions that will guide the work of the Ocean Decade and its partners to 2030. Of course, there will be another check-in point in 2027 in the next Ocean Decade conference. But really, this is going to be, we had the implementation plan in 2021, and this is now a key piece of complementary work to the implementation plan in updating the strategic ambition of the Ocean Decade challenges. We've also looked at some of the formulation of the challenges themselves, and then a range of, as I say, very what we hope are very concrete actions to guide our work and to guide our partners' work in coming years. And so the actions, and you'll see them in a lot more detail in the report, but the actions are basically divided into two categories. The first set of actions are around some of the key science and knowledge priorities that are needed to develop solutions for a range of different issues. And these issues are obviously drawn from the Ocean Decade challenges, but they go to a much more granular level of the Ocean Decade challenges. And you can see some of these here, some of the questions around looking at the land-sea interface for marine pollution and emerging pollutants, looking at emerging threats to deep sea ecosystems, thinking about some further knowledge and solutions for decision support tools for coastal resilience, thinking about how we're bringing in social science, which is something which is still lacking in the decade, how we're bringing in economic science and political science to help underpin knowledge on investment. So you can see there are a diverse set of science and knowledge priorities. And then the second set of priorities are really around the enabling factors to help meet and to fulfill the science and knowledge priorities. And some of these were identified as priorities from the outset of the decade. But again, through this whole process of Vision 2030 and through Barcelona and leading to the consolidated outcomes report, we've been able to put a lot more, I guess, depth and substance into how we are going to really be able to work together over the next few years to achieve some of these enabling factors. And again, some of the key things that come out here are the need to really have a stronger and more systematic process of the policy and the user needs driving the science and the knowledge that is being generated through the decade. The approaches and tools and skills that we're going to be able to use to increase inclusivity, equity, and diversity, whether that be different knowledge systems, whether that be geographic diversity through SIDS, through least developed countries, how we're going to think about capacity development, so we're really having sustained impact, how we're going to work better at the national level, and particularly providing support to member states, for example, on meeting different obligations and commitments under global policy frameworks. And of course, with COP16 coming up in Cali with the biodiversity, the global biodiversity framework starting next week, this is very, very relevant at the moment. We're having lots of discussions around biodiversity issues. And then how are we looking at sustained and sustainable investment for ocean science to ensure that the decade really can have a step change in the way that we're thinking about the return on investment in ocean science and ocean science infrastructure. And there's a particular recommendation which is very relevant for this audience, of course, that I would like to bring out, which is that within this report, the role of best practices is specifically mentioned as a recommendation and as an action coming out of the Vision 2030 process. And you can see the full text here, but essentially it is the report is recommending that we're working with the best practices program and the best practices community across the decade to really further support the development and sharing of best practices, standardized methodologies, and policies across the Ocean Decade challenges. So many of the white papers stressed this need for best practices, for standardized methodologies. And so we feel that there is a real need to have this as a specific recommendation coming out of the Vision 2030 process, that we work with this community to see how we can really strengthen the role of OBPS within the decade to respond to some of those specific needs coming out of the Vision 2030 process and the Action Ambition Impact Report. So I know I'm coming to the end of time, but I do want to. I've got just 2 more slides. So this slide is showing how we are going to basically work. I mean, it's fairly high level still, but basically how we're going to work to start implementing the actions that are identified in the Ambition Action Impact Report. And 3 big pillars of work. First of all, the translation of those global actions, which do remain relatively, high level, to regional and national priorities. And so really working with the national decade committees, with our decentralized coordination hubs, to make sure that at a regional level, at a thematic level, at a national level, the actions, the recommendations, and the priorities are the most relevant that they can be for different contexts. We'll also be putting out, through the Call for Decade Actions processes, tailored calls for decade actions that really draw on some of those specific recommendations that are in the Vision 2030 white papers and also in the Consolidated Outcomes Report. And the next Call for Decade Actions actually opens tomorrow, the 15th of October. And so you will see already some of the language coming through the Vision 2030 process into this first Call for Decade Actions, which was the first call for decade actions after Barcelona. So the first time we've really tried to link these processes together. And then in addition to this, we're launching 5 new flagship initiatives under the Ocean Decade, where the Decade Coordination Unit is working with partners, both within IOC, UNESCO, but also external partners, to really push the global agenda on key issues coming out of the Vision 2030 process. And so these are around issues such as investment in ocean science, seabed mapping, coastal cities resilience, marine pollution, and sustainable ocean planning. And we've really picked a subset of recommendations where IOC, where the DCU has an added value in playing a leadership role. And of course, using some of these major upcoming events to really build constituencies and partnerships around these. So stay tuned for more information on this, because I think there's a link to best practices in these different initiatives as well. And of course, the United Nations Ocean Conference in Nice next year will be a pivotal moment in presenting some of these initiatives, but also building further partnerships, action, and commitment around these initiatives, as well as other recommendations coming out of the Vision 2030 process as we move forward in the decade. I'm going to finish there, but I did just want to also put up this last slide, because I know OPBS has had a huge focus and commitment to early career ocean professionals. And since I was giving the presentation, I also thought I'd use this just to also let you know that just last Friday, we opened the call for the second edition of the Mario Ruivo Memorial Lecture Series for early career ocean professionals. So if we have any early career ocean professionals on the well, I'm sure we do, participating in the webinar, this is a wonderful opportunity to showcase your work in front of the IOC Assembly, and it's a joint initiative with Euroocean, Portugal, IOC, and the Ocean Decade, and just using every opportunity to really get information about this memorial lecture out there. So with that, I will end it, but very happy to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much. Indeed, a very impressive effort, as was shown in your snapshot slide, through these years, and which will impact all of us, especially with these flagship partnerships. I think it will have a great impact. There are a couple of questions. Please have a look at Q&A, because we're running out of time. We have already taken time from the coffee break. So the same for all the other panelists. Please have a look at the Q&A. Some are very specific, some are more general. Feel free to contribute to those. And with this, I'll stop here. Let's move to the coffee break, but keep the time, so we will reconvene in 8 minutes. And I'll hand over to more experienced people, to Craig and Johannes, who will take the lead on with the next section. Thank you very much, all. Thank you.
George, are we good to reconvene?
Hi, Greg. Yes, yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope everyone is back after a brief break. And I bring you greetings from the St. Lawrence Seaway, where I'm on a ship. And actually, the weather conditions are very similar to the background that we have here right now, although it's not live. It's in the can as everyone is sharing, but looking out to the port side and rather enjoying the view. Hope to see some whales. Brings to mind the relevance of what we're talking about here and our ability to be generating proper forecasts, identify and design a system of governance. So as we move on towards panel 2 here with Emma Heslop, with Pierre Fietzek and Enrique Alvarez, I'm going to start first with inviting Emma to take the floor. Emma is with the Global Ocean Observing System at the IOC, quartered at the IOC. She is a physical oceanographer, and Emma's career has been geographically diverse and subject matter diverse, where she's worked in research, also in the technology industry, and by her work in the IOC certainly has demonstrated her adept abilities at international governance, where she is a program specialist focusing on the Global Ocean Observing System and residing at the IOC headquarters in Paris. Emma, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Can you see my presentation now? I need to re-go there. Okay, hang on a sec.
Emma, it was up for just a moment, and then I think it came back down.
Okay. Do you see it again now?
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for those kind words, Craig. So I'm going to jump in. This session is a little bit around stimulating ocean best practices, but I also want to kind of reflect on the range of best practices that we're trying to stimulate, which I think has also been a thread through some of the sessions, some of the talks in the first session. So GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System, and IODE are the two key sponsors of the Ocean Best Practice System project. And so I'm going to speak sort of mainly from a GOOS perspective, but then also kind of look at it from a broader IOC perspective. And just a little bit of a background for GOOS, for those who haven't come across the Global Ocean Observing System before. We fundamentally seek to support the taking and coordinate the taking of ocean observations globally, and you'll see a little bit some of our structures in the next slides. And our focus really is on providing the information that society needs around climate, around the blue economy, around ocean health, maybe community adaptation, so many different areas, and really seeking that the flexible observing system is able to provide the information needed for a wide range of applications. And I think you saw in the example from Srinivas earlier, within INCOIS, the wide range of applications that they are providing. So the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, we really are a sort of a here in Paris at the IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, we are seeking to support the coordination globally, really to advocate for ocean best practices, make sure that they're visible, and to strengthen the system. And the ocean best practices are part of that sort of strengthening facility. So we work with an ecosystem of providers in national systems, but also a variety of networks across various different disciplines. And we also communicate with the beneficiaries of the ocean information, be that direct users such as the underneath the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, who are using observations for weather forecasting through the Sendai Framework Convention on Biological Diversity, and COP16 is next week, and we're preparing for that. So really working with these major frameworks around climate, biodiversity, and major service providers in weather and climate and other areas to understand what their needs are, and also within increasingly within industry, so that we can set some standards and frameworks around that, and so that the observations that the various different parts of the organization are taking really add up to providing the information that's needed for a variety of services and frameworks. And so that's the sort of the role of GOOS. Some of these frameworks include things like the essential ocean variables, and there are now 36 essential ocean variables across physics, biogeochemistry, biology and ecosystems, and now some cross-disciplinary sort of ocean human impact on the ocean area. And these really are a reference for ocean observing. They're a reference for the best practices, and they support harmonization and collaboration. And they're also at the same time a kind of a minimum set of ocean variables that are needed now to assess ocean state and variability and to provide data for the applications that benefit society. So this is a kind of a key framework, and you will have seen this within the best practices. There are also a number of observing networks that GOOS coordinates, and more than 84 countries now contribute to those. And within these networks, we look at the data and the metadata flow, the implementation, but we also look at whether the best practices, whether they have best practices across the various essential ocean variables that they take, and whether those best practices reach from, you know, how to take the observations right the way through to perhaps the quality assurance, etc., before the data reaches the data management centers. And so these are the best practices are very important within GOOS, within the network sense, and also to ensure that the connection along the value chain, that we are the methodologies that are being used to create that information can be tracked and are known. So GOOS is working towards the 2030 strategy. We're now, I guess, sort of 4 years in from that. And one of the key underpinnings is this value chain, and I just mentioned how that's important in the best practices arena, ensuring that the data is flowing through to services, and that a series of known methodologies have been used to create trusted information. So within the 2030 strategy, one of our strategic objectives is sustain and strengthen and expand the observing system implementation. And amongst there is promoting standards and best practices and developing metrics to measure success. So the concept of using community best identified practices is very much embedded into the infrastructure of GOOS. We also have a long history, well, about as long as the best practices system, but we've been involved from the early days, and perhaps this also is reflected in the number of best practices around ocean observing that are in the system today. But when the first sort of group was formed to start to work on developing what would later become the Ocean Best Practice System, the Vice Chair of Standards and Best Practices within the Observation Coordination Group, that was Juliet Hermes, was involved. And so we've been involved ever since in the notion that the Ocean Best Practices became a project under IOC with GOOS and IODE, working on creating a GOOS endorsement process, and now there are a number of GOOS endorsed best practices within the system, and we'll have a quick look at that. So the Ocean Best Practice System, one of the metadata fields that you can search on is in fact the essential ocean variables, as I mentioned earlier. And if we use some of these to search on the what best practices lie underneath these essential ocean variables, we get some really quite big numbers. And perhaps this brings up one of the first sort of questions about how we are going to use the Ocean Best Practice System moving forward. Is these are quite a lot of responses. How do we identify perhaps what is endorsed within GOOS or other communities, and how do we look at converging these or signaling to our constituents, users of the best practice system, which best practice they might want to evaluate out of what are sometimes sort of 200 or 300 papers or documents in the system. Underneath the best practice system are a number of communities. There are now 69 communities, and these vary from some of those networks under GOOS that I mentioned through to GOOS itself and IODE and various other areas. And one thought at the moment is that, you know, having some user feedback on what the communities are and how that would best help the people navigate the best practices would also be a useful component. And having some standards around the use of communities within the best practices. So the GOOS endorsement process, this was set up and came into operation just a couple of years ago, and it really seeks to ensure that we find the best practices that have been adopted by the GOOS community, by the networks or by one of the more discipline-based communities. It needs to have gone through a sort of a convergence process and have a documented community review process, and then be passed by one of the parts of GOOS in order to become a GOOS endorsed best practice. But this has really been a successful process for GOOS, and I think the Ocean Best Practice System, and that has been extended so that the principles could be applied to other communities. But there are some really big numbers for the downloads of these GOOS endorsed best practices. And I think this is really how, you know, one of the key ways that the best practice system should be useful to our communities, to allow people to identify those key best practices, save people reinventing the wheel, etc. So just some thoughts on how the best practices sort of information is being used today. I think the endorsement process is clearly useful, and we could increase the visibility of this success and perhaps encourage the development of other really community reviewed best practices. I think we could improve how users could find the information that they're really looking for. There is a great role for the Ocean Best Practice System to continue advocacy for the creation of best practices and engendering work on practice convergence and considering where we might need standards in the future. One area that the best practice system is working on is looking at these practices that are in the best practice system and working at whether, you know, a sort of a pathway towards creating what is a best practice and sort of having the community review process along the way. And there's a paper out at the moment, which I'm sure would have been mentioned at the beginning of the session, if not, will be a part of the work moving forward with the Ocean Best Practice System. And this will, I think, really help identify for users which sort of practice that they might be looking for. So I just want to finish with a couple of thoughts for IOC. So standards and best practices are really important for the IOC and across the system, as has always been mentioned. They really lead to greater efficiency so that people are not left reinventing the wheel, and greater compatibility down the value chain for the information that's being developed. They lead to interoperability between data sets and between methods and greater reproducibility. With identified community best practices, we can lead to streamlining of the of regulatory approval, perhaps, and also higher funding success. There is an improvement in the data quality and the trust in the data when there is a known provenance and known methods, and this also can link into that kind of, you know, funding success. And improved systems interoperability across all the communities and the value chain will really help improve system-wide interoperability and strength right the way down to services, and also help us promote those best practices globally. So some of the IOC goals in this place will really be to ensure that there is a core set of IOC community endorsed best practices that are findable, are used, and are used to support the delivery of trusted information. It will be really important to provide these community adopted best practices across IOC, across all the EOVs, and across the ocean information value chain. Working towards increased harmonisation of best practices is also still important, even as we reach out across a broader range of best practices. And continuing that advocacy and even for advocating for valuing or placing greater value on the creation of best practices is important. I think there is some work to do to improve the utility of the repository so that users coming up can efficiently find really that practice that they're looking for, especially as we seek to increase the number of best practices and broaden the range in the repository. And the implementation of this maturity model, I think, will help improve the thinking and the maturity of our engagement as an ocean community with what are practices and what are best practices, and lead to improved searchability and improved metadata. So those are some of the kind of the IOC goals for the next period, and maybe some of those conversations will come up across the week. Anyway, with that, I'll end and say thank you very much.
Emma, thank you for your presentation. I think the opportunity here, beg your pardon, pushing the wrong buttons, but I think the opportunity here, as we might further in the discussion, is potentially to be looking further at adoption of best practices and what are the governance mechanisms to really force those, what are the incentives. So thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation. I'm sure that all the members in the panel do as well. So next up, we have Fietzek, and Pierre, welcome. Pierre is working for the Kongsberg Discovery Group, where he's an international leader in management and governance for sustainability in ocean science initiatives. And if you just parse those words out, that's a pretty significant demonstration of contribution and market opportunity for the commercial sector. I think many of us in the ocean community are very familiar with the products of Kongsberg. Pierre works from Germany for this Norwegian company, and he's been very active in the field of helping to develop digital data solutions, sensor development, a respected physics major who has done work in this professional field and is helping to advance the commercial contributions to ocean observing. Pierre, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg, for this kind introduction. Thank you very much, the other speakers. This was a fantastic lineup here, and I'm also looking forward to the follow-up discussions and the entire week. I mean, it doesn't end here, right, after this plenary. I hope you can see the slide. Okay, if I don't hear otherwise, I'll continue.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, perfect. So a short outline. After a little motivation introduction, which is, I think, quite important, we'll jump into the ocean observing environment, learn a little bit about the changes that are happening at the moment, and then make a transition towards the blue economy and see where the links are. Then afterwards, we'll introduce the ocean enterprise concept, link it with the ocean observing value chain that we have seen in some of the presentations so far. Highlight the Ocean Observing Initiative roadmap. I'll give a short summary of a standards dialogue that happened earlier this year, before jumping to a suggestion on how to achieve a more industrialized ocean enterprise, and then finally concluding by providing a little bit of an answer to this question that is also the title of this presentation. We start very, very top down. The ocean is very important. I think this needs to be emphasized again and again, because we need to promote this concept. We need to promote that. And even if I'm preaching to the choir here, I think it's just important that we do not lose connection and emphasize this over and over again. The ocean affects the society, especially through these items that we have written up here on the slide, but it must not be forgotten that it's also the society that impacts the ocean in return. Because of that, it is not surprising at all that the ocean is also vital and connected to 4 global crises that we have. One is the climate crisis, the other one is related to food security, then we have energy production, and unfortunately, getting more urgent recently, it's the geopolitical situation that is also linked to ocean matters. We as a company serve the entire ocean space with technology. We provide within our business area of Kongsberg Discovery, especially sensors and awareness tools and also platforms to help in these various applications that you see here on that slide. What I I will not go into detail into any of these, but what I would like to mention and stress here is that the different markets behind all of these applications have different maturity levels. And we'll come back to that term that will return later in that presentation. So let's look a little bit at how ocean observing has changed over the last centuries, actually. What we see is that the changes on Earth do not go unnoticed for the ocean. We see the increase in population, increase in atmospheric CO2, sea level rise, and so on and so on. Also a decline in animal abundance in the ocean, whereas litter and microplastics increase. But we also get a more understanding of that. And this is due to our change in technology used for ocean observing. And it is good that we have this process started, but we are far from reaching the end there. The importance of ocean observing is also, or can be found also in the SDGs, in the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is one present publication, for example, saying that many of the SDGs may not be realized without achieving the SDG 14, life underwater for a healthy ocean. And that sets the stage for why ocean observation and data is needed, why it is critical for the economy, the blue economy, as well as society. One aspect is ocean management, ecosystem services, sustainable fisheries, also biodiversity related, and then climate change, forecast, adaptation, as well as other aspects. And I have highlighted here biodiversity and climate change because these are also topics discussed on the highest political levels, on the highest political tiers. And that's a good thing. That means that there is attention and we can use that attention in our favor. Emma gave a fantastic introduction to GOOS, so there is not much I have to say about it, but this slide is in that presentation because talking about ocean observation without giving reference to GOOS and highlighting what it has achieved over the past years wouldn't be complete. So GOOS is absolutely important in this context with the introduction of the EUVs and their coordinating efforts. They are a very important framework in that concept. Okay. So let's see what changes are underway in that field of ocean observing. On the academia and science side, we see consolidation and harmonization happening, structuring, organization, and convergence, as we heard in the first presentation. So standards are introduced. We have this application of the fair data principle, the best practices, very, very important, of course, the EUVs, etc., and GOOS transitioning towards a sustained, fully operational system, a little bit with a connection to the meteorology system. I would like to use that slide to give credit to the Ocean Best Practices system, actually. I think it was in the early 2010s where I first had a meeting with Jay Perlman. It was about dissolved gas sensors. And from that time onwards, the Ocean Best Practice, or what became the Ocean Best Practices system, managed to receive funding through various projects. And that was a good step. It started with Atlantos, and then it kept on receiving attention and funding within significant ocean observing related projects. The next thing I remember is a link up with Luigi Buttigieg, where he was introducing the search engine that Emma also just highlighted. And back in the day, I was a sensor developer and I saw the challenges of that, right? The question was, okay, if I search for a certain parameter, which of the papers will show up first? How do we make sure that it is the proper items listed high in the ranks and not simply the ones that are the longest out there? And then another milestone I remember is when the actual journal was introduced, like Frontiers in Marine Science with Johannes Karstensen, if I'm not mistaken, taking a very early lead in that. And these were all very important steps and actually a prerequisite for maturing something that I will introduce on the following slide as the Ocean Enterprise. So this whole concept of introducing the Ocean Best Practices system is a very, very important process in our community. And I think it was due to the dedication and work of many that it reached that step, obviously, but it also convinced by logic, right? It became clear that this structuring, that this convergence, that these best practices bring a lot of value. The next change is happening on industry side. Whereas there was a focus on technology in the past, industry now more and more embraces to derive information, provide information, and do not stop by only providing the technology. And there is also something that I would call economical sustainability that I will introduce on the following slides. And we have common trends that are in support of our ambitions here to make ocean observing receiving more attention. And this is the growing societal environmental awareness, and also the growing number of platforms in the field and the more data that we collect. It's not yet enough, but at least the trend goes in the right direction. So a little detour and picking out one parameter, and this is or one set of sensors, one set of technologies. This is active acoustic sensors. Active acoustic sensors have developed significantly over the past decades. They are now small enough to go on almost any platform. And why am I saying this? I say this because in the past, or in the beginning, they were mainly used for biomass detection and assessment. They still do that. They do that very well, actually, but it is not only the biomass that detection and quantification they are used for at the moment. I want to give a shout out to the ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas working group on fishery acoustics, science and technology, that this year actually has their 40th anniversary. So for 40 years, it is members of academia, technologists, engineers, biologists, working together with industry on advancing acoustic methods in the context of stock assessments and biomass surveys. And that's a very good sign, actually, because I also checked the Ocean Best Practices search engine, and I found that some of the ICES publications show up when searching for these parameters. So that's a good sign that this falls nicely together. But the message I want to convey with that slide was that it did not stop with the biomass application. The active acoustics are also used, the same sensors are used for detecting and quantifying non-biological targets, such as oceanographic layers, sediment clouds, gas bubbles, etc. So the message that I want to leave here is that more platforms, more applications, and user groups are expanded by using the same type of sensors that has certain positive consequences, and also leads to more needed data for critical questions around ocean management. And it is not only the technology that sees more applications. By the way, this is one way of generating more data. There is other technology or the other procedures, such as accessible ocean technologies or citizen science, which are also valid strategies on getting more data. But I've highlighted here this approach on generating more quality data from various platforms. It doesn't stop with the technology as such. The actual sensors are complemented by digital solutions more recently. And this is an example from us, but there are, of course, others. But just to highlight to you what functionalities are available at the moment. One is remote control of sensors, right? You do not need to be on board of the vessel anymore to comprehensively make changes to the settings of the sensors. Processing. You can do a lot of data processing now on the vehicles, on the USVs, on the research vessels directly, without the need to do that as part of post-processing. It is there's also advancement with regards to data management on board of vessels to make data accessible much quicker. And the last element here highlights the connection to models, to twins, to really get this information component out of monitoring efforts. So the digital elements complementing hardware help with automation, help with collaboration because they are agnostic and not limited to a single vendor, and they help with this access to information such that the end users benefit from it. The global blue economy is expected to grow, and it's expected to grow significantly. We have this study by the OECD, which is cited very often, that tells us that by 2030 we'll expect size of the global blue economy of $3 trillion US. And we obviously see from 2010 to 2030 expected increase in or decrease in offshore oil and gas activities, while offshore wind is supposed to grow. Fish processing is also supposed to grow. Nothing of that is really exciting. The key question is, where is ocean data collection hiding in there? Why is ocean data collection, why is ocean observing not an industry? Well, to some extent, it links to the fact that a lot of these sensors that also our company and other companies provide end up in some of these existing elements of the or sectors of the blue economy. Yet, it might be a reasonable question to ask whether it isn't time to introduce a market as a standalone environment for the collection of data, for the provision of services independent from the end user market, because according to the fair data principle, a lot of the data will be used in various applications and not in a single one. And this gives this connection to what the ocean enterprise actually is. I will tell you this on the next slide, but just to show you here, we have some first national studies, one for the US, one for the UK, and one for Canada, already highlighting that what we refer to as the ocean enterprise has significant volume and could become a standalone or recognized as a standalone market going forward. So what is the ocean enterprise? The ocean enterprise is kind of an umbrella term, which per definition comprises representatives of the private, of the public, and the academic sector, all individuals and institutions that are concerned with the collection of data, with the provision of services, with anything that relates to this part of the ocean observing value chain, conducting or providing the technology, carrying out the observations, collecting and managing the data, and providing the information products to the end users to meet their needs. To put it in a little bit blunt and direct fashion, there are shortcomings in this concept, right? We don't have a consistent view of technology needs. There is a lack of visibility of market potential. The market is still very fragmented. Units are sold in small unit numbers. R&D efforts are duplicated. New commercial services need to be established and haven't found their real place yet in that value chain. As a result, the unit costs for some of the sensors are at the moment still quite high. We do not have universal standards for all of the measurements, and the system resilience is also limited because the number of suppliers isn't very big. By the way, the work related to the ocean enterprise is an effort that is run by the Marine Technology Society, the Global Ocean Observing System, as well as NOAA, and you will find a lot of information on the website oceanenterprise.com. How would a mature environment look like, on the other hand, if we embraced this concept of the ocean enterprise, if we all felt part of it, if we communicated it in a cohesive fashion, and if we really put all the efforts in maturing this as an industrial environment? We would have more clarity. Planning capacity would be better for industrial players. We could introduce more manufacturing efficiency. The demand for driving more innovation and new technology was bigger because the market boundary conditions would be clearer. There would be a drop in data price per data point because equipment price would drop. Power of aggregated demand, units could be purchased and better conditions could be agreed on when purchased in larger numbers. And all of that would contribute to sustained ocean observing and help with this derivation of information products. And these first three items are linked to the providers and are benefits to the providers of the technology. These are advantages that link to the actual entities that conduct the measurements. And the last two bullets represent items that are benefits to society as such. As I already introduced, the Ocean Enterprise Initiative is this effort that started back in 2022 with the introduction of a background paper where we introduced this version of the value chain and made some basic formulations. We conducted four large dialogues with more than 400 participants on 4 topics: instrument provision, the multi-sectoral ocean architecture, the user-driven ocean information services, and how to look ahead. And if I'm not mistaken, this was actually one of the first initiatives, if not the first initiative, where there was direct interaction between GOOS and industry until today. We took the information from these dialogues, synthesized it into a synthesis paper. It was a lot of input that we had to bring together there. And also in 23, it was NOAA that provided a project worth of $3.9 million to the MTS and the consortium, partially allowing them to bring this concept further forward. And earlier this year, we have provided and concluded in a roadmap. And this roadmap has 3 overarching goals. The first one is that a robust ocean enterprise should be recognized as essential to lives and livelihoods, and it should not be considered peripheral going forward. The ocean enterprise should also be visible and identifiable, and it should be a recognized contributor to the GDP, sorry. And finally, it should be recognized as a distinct market sector that attracts investment to further grow and bring forward the industrialization. So we have the overarching goals, we have 10 challenges, and to address these 10 challenges, we have a large amount of action pathways identified in this roadmap publication that, again, you can find when you go to oceanenterprise.com. And here's the example of the challenges called standards, which you would find under collaborations to grow. For every of these challenges, we would have success indicators, action pathways, and linkages to other initiatives, and I recommend that you check this out. Earlier this year at Oceanology International, we had a standards dialogue because from the very beginning, standards were mentioned as an important topic within this entire discussions. And so earlier at the Oceanology International, we had participants from the private, academic, non-for-profit, governmental and intergovernmental institutions meet to discuss about standards. And here's a formulation from the report, which you can also find on the website, that standards, and standards are here highlighted because with standards we mean all the activities, or we summarize all the activities that help with this synthesis, and they also involve best practices on that slide here. And those standards are referred to as a catalyst for market advancement and increased investment. So they are very central in this concept. The participants highlighted the critical need for collaboration, standardization, and innovation to drive the progress and ensure industry growth, while also touching on the complexity of standards. And by identifying the challenges and opportunities, the session laid the groundwork for concerted efforts to advance standards within the marine technology sector. Different breakout sessions were formed, and there were next steps suggested. The first one was to make GOOS more requests for standards, to involve the community further, to have a user-focused lens, meaning that the standards should attribute and target concrete applications, real-world applications, promote successful standards, and get inspiration from existing standards to drive the discussion forward. The work of the Ocean Enterprise continues with dialogues with industry. Further work will be done in the direction of standards, helping with an information service, workforce development, as well as further partnering with other institutions, because nobody can do that alone, obviously. Second last slide. To achieve a more industrialized and mature ocean enterprise, in order to really harvest some of these advantages, it is very important to have a common goal and enhance the collaboration between the different stakeholders. And the roadmap is a very important piece of work in that context. The roadmap, by the way, tries to improve the ocean enterprise holistically. We are not picking out one element, such as workforce development or only standards. No, the idea of the Ocean Enterprise initiative is to really fuel and mature this entire environment, because only then we can really harvest the advantages. And here is an example of how collaboration between science and industry lead to more attention and to more value in this field, which is central to grow the ocean enterprise as well. I've shown here a helix symbol because if science and industry, if academia and industry manage to work closely together through private-public partnerships and have successful examples, this will receive the attention of politics or other institutions. And by that, showing successful and productive collaboration, we get more of the attention we want, we get more of the investments we want, and we can bring that forward. And the collaboration between science and industry is, from my perspective, something that we should foster further, and that is actually straightforward because there is ultimately no competition between academia and industry. There is various options for win-win initiatives. And collaborations are happening, but they should be further fostered, and there is also time for a step change to more ambitious projects. So to conclude and answer the question, why and how to mature the ocean enterprise in the interest of all its stakeholders. Ocean observation data and services are critical for the blue economy and the society, and the ocean enterprise develops through standards, ocean best practices, and also product sustainability. And maturing the ocean enterprise holds benefits for academia, the private sector, and society. So how can we do that? Well, with the roadmap, there is one suggestion of holistically driving and bringing forward the ocean enterprise concept, and science-industry collaboration, due to its win-win options, is a central element in there, and we should consider approaching significant and impactful initiatives. The role of standards is absolutely central in that context. The lacks of standards were mentioned from the very beginning as part of the dialogues with industry, and it is essential. They are essential for the operability and the progression of the ocean enterprise. And lastly, the adoption of the ocean best practices system by the community, I think, could also act as a role model for the Ocean Enterprise Initiative, because the Ocean Enterprise Initiative at the moment stands at a point where I think the Ocean Best Practices System has stand around 10 years ago. And by that, I think it's important that we try to bring the Ocean Best Practices and the Ocean Enterprise concept a little bit closer to each other. Thank you very much.
Pierre, thank you for that excellent presentation and analysis. And I think it heightens the visibility of where GOOS is going and where global ocean observing is going, and the value of incorporating industry and commercial thinking into advancing this. It's not just a science question in order to reach the societal goals. Pierre, thank you very much. Our concluding speaker is Enrique Alvarez, and he's a physical oceanographer that many of you know, and he's a forecaster as well. He's the technical coordinator of the Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Prediction, which is hosted by Mercator Ocean International. I think each of us around the globe can look at Mercator and recognize the excellence of the products that are developed. And Enrique, thank you very much for joining us. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Craig, for your kind words. And I will directly go to share my screen and explain to you what are we trying to achieve at the Ocean Prediction DCC, and how is this connected to the world of best practices. So my presentation is connecting the world around ocean forecasting, and certainly with a special focus on the best practices. So first word, an explanation of what we are trying to achieve with the Ocean Prediction DCC. If I have to summarize this in a single slide, that will be it. On the left, we have the ocean forecasting. This is a description of the ocean forecasting we have today. We are proud of the systems that we have because we have been developing those systems for decades and they are useful for many applications, but we have to admit that we are far from perfect. Our systems are not connected, both from the technical point of view or even from the human point of view, because we don't have really a good community linking together the developers and the users and all the socioeconomic sectors involved in this. Also, the systems are difficult to install, difficult to operate, difficult to maintain. And this means that we have poor presence of these systems on those institutions that are technologically less advanced. We want to change or contribute to change this scenario to a different one where we will have many more robust systems worldwide, and those will be connected in a network, in a technical network, but also on a human network where people that is going to develop new system will have the right contacts to help them at the beginning to develop these new systems. Hopefully that will end with many more robust systems worldwide. So we are doing this in the framework of the UN Ocean Decade. In this analogy of the vessel of the UN Collaborative Center for Ocean Prediction, we are working obviously on the framework of the Ocean Decade. Therefore, our chief engineer are the decade actions, and also we want to leverage on the opportunity provided by the arrival of the concept of the digital twin of the ocean. That is very important for interoperability, as you will see. Our crew is the community that we are building now around ocean prediction, and our role is the one of navigator, setting the course from one place to other, inspire this transformation. We are not alone in this. In the framework of the decade, we are working with other decade collaborative centers and decade collaborative offices. It's basically the same kind of structure. We have on one hand the thematic ones distributed around the globe. We heard a couple of hours ago about the Indian Ocean Region Decade Collaborative Center. And we have the thematic Decade Collaborative Center having a group here which is dealing with the core aspects of the value chain, the ocean prediction, the data sharing, and the ocean observation. And then another group of very important thematic Decade Collaborative Centers, such as the Coastal Resilient DCC. We have two pillars to develop these ideas. First of all is our community. Our community, we're building it through what we call the regional teams. It's impossible to be influential around the globe from Toulouse. So we decided to take the best of the UNEP regional Cs, the best of the GOOS regional alliances, and build our regional teams based on this and in close collaboration both with UNEP regional Cs and GOOS regional alliances, trying not to reinvent the wheel. For example, just to give you an example, on the Med Sea, where we have a very good activity on modeling, we just rely on the Mongoose group for ocean forecasting as our regional team, as the core of our regional team for ocean prediction DCC. And now that these teams are formed and they are operating, those are our boots on the ground for supporting the decade action related to ocean forecasting, to identify gaps and ways forward, also to implement actions for capacity building. We have not started that, but we have serious plans to start this next year, and to advocate for the implementation, of best practices, standards, and tools. So, sorry about that. We are going to link onto these best practices, standards, and tools really soon. So these are the leaders of our regional teams. And when we put these leaders together with all the institutions that are on the steering teams of the regional teams, we have a fantastic network of institutions and we are working together trying to achieve these objectives. Let's move to more technical stuff and let's get closer to the best practices. So the second pillar must be, for sure, the technical pillar. As I mentioned, we have this problem that the systems are somehow disconnected. Even the core services are not fully connected. That's a difference with the meteorological world. And also, even if you are able to build an ocean forecasting system, it's difficult exploitation because you don't have possibilities to use common tools for validation, dissemination, exploitation. Interoperability is quite limited, etc., etc. So we have the decade as an opportunity, as a game changer, to advance in this towards the new scenario that I was mentioning on my first slide. Look that I wrote here, towards a solution. We are not saying we are solving all these problems in one shot, but we are advancing towards solution. And for doing that, we have built what we call the Ocean Forecasting Co-Design Team. It's a group of 40 experts around the globe that have designed it, in fact, a new architecture for ocean forecasting. I will talk about that later, and will make a special focus on standards, development of tools, best practice, etc., in cooperation with related decade programs. The idea is to inspire all these decade program development targets so we can, through this definition of architectures, standards, best practices, inspire the development of the different decade programs so we can advance on a coordinated way. This is the team, and we are obviously working in close collaboration with the GATE programs. Very especially, I would like to mention Foresee, Cost Predict, DTOP, Ocean Best Practices as very, very relevant on these activities. And this is the list of institutions that have participated in these activities and have worked on this definition of best practices that I will describe. So there are many, many ways for sure to promote ocean forecasting worldwide. We have defined our own way to do it. So this is the way we want to move forward in the following years. So it is through this virtuous loop. These virtuous loops start with the knowledge. And for the knowledge, we want to focus a lot on a document which is called the TÜV's Guide. The TÜV's is the experting on operational ocean forecasting services, a body depending on GOOS. TÜV's has published a guide on ocean forecasting that contains the very basic knowledge about what is needed to know to start with the world of ocean forecasting. Then there's a new document that will be published probably this week on the webpage. This is finished now, and it's going to be on the Ocean Prediction DCC webpage probably this week, which is the architecture guide. And you will see that this is the instructions on how to build a system. So now that you have the knowledge, you can build a system. Then you have to operate. This is where we link to the world of best practices. For that, we have built the operational readiness level. I will explain what is this in next slides. And finally, we have to integrate this and provide services with this data. All this will be done in the future on the digital twins, and this will provide more knowledge that have to go back to the TÜV's guide, closing the loop. Of course, again, I say we are not doing this alone. We are doing this in coordination for CED and other decade actions. So let's analyze a little bit these assets, and let's go to see the best practices development that we have done recently. We start by the knowledge. I invite you to have a look to the TÜV's guide if you haven't looked into that. And we have converted this publication that was published 2 years ago. Now it's a wiki site into the Ocean Prediction DCC webpage. So we expect that this will open the door to more people contributing, adding knowledge into this public reservoir of knowledge that is the TÜV's guide. Then we move to the development of systems, and I was mentioning that we have built, and it's going to be published. I hope it will be available this week on the website, the so-called architecture guide for ocean forecasting. And this is a set of wiring diagrams explaining how to build an ocean forecasting system. It's the dream book if you are starting to develop an ocean forecasting system, or if you want to check if your ocean forecasting system is properly set up from a technical point of view. So it's quite a technical publication. With these diagrams are the high-level diagrams showing, for example, what is the role of the digital twins into this. And then if we go down, we have one by one all the diagrams with all the components and all the tools that are needed to properly implement an ocean forecasting system. The idea, obviously, is converting in the future all these tools and all these data standards into actual existing pieces of software, and to continue this work by adding additional layers of detail to all these guidelines. One of them, for example, is the data standards. We understand data standards. You have to understand it not like a format, but it's the whole way on how to store properly the information and how to access properly the information. And this is far more complicated than it might look like. It includes information about metrics, about quality information, manual on how to access the data, definition of the vocabulary, extended dataset metadata, and so on, and API. So it's a complicated world, and we are starting now a new work to try to define these data standards for ocean forecasting, try to promote interoperability thanks to a common agreement of what is needed to store and how it is needed to store. And as I said, it might look trivial on a first thinking, but when you think it twice, it's far from trivial, because there are a lot of stuff that has to be incorporated here, and it's usually not incorporated when people is dealing with ocean forecasting. Then we go to the next part of the value chain. Let me check the time. Okay, which is the operations and upgrade of the system. And for that, we have built what we call the operational readiness level guide. And this is basically, this is going to be also published soon. It's going to be on a peer review paper. We are finalizing the reply to the reviewers, and that I hope that this will be probably in the next month published. And basically, this is a mechanism to introduce best practices in ocean forecasting, and therefore it's a way to promote the evolution of ocean forecasting systems. And what we have done is to put a collection of ocean best practices and put this into a test where the people that is running an ocean forecasting system can check if they are doing correctly with respect to these best practices. These best practices are related to production, system validation, and product dissemination. So at the end, you have 3 numbers that are telling you how well you are doing with these aspects of the ocean forecasting. And in fact, what you have is a list of best practices that goes from very, very basic, advancing more and more, to really very complex and very advanced one at the highest level. And what you do is check all these best practices and see where you can go in the ladder of this operational readiness level. So by doing that, you can really have a good impression of where you are with your best practices in the operation of your ocean forecasting system. We want to continue this work also linking with the TÜVs and with GOOS. So we have now an action plan for the TÜVs and GOOS, which is basically continue our work on the TÜVs guide, but also to involve GOOS and TÜVs into this operational readiness level and being able to use the GOOS endorsement mechanism to endorse the best practices associated to this operational readiness level, and even to acknowledge, to give a service to those that want to have validated their operational readiness level with a GOOS stamp. Okay, so I have 444 and I have checked it with GOOS and this is correct. I have a stamp that my system is 444 with respect to the operational readiness level. Of course, that is very powerful because we can work with the national focal points and therefore we can be enormously influential with the member states. So this is the strategy with that. Finally, we have the integration. The integration is, as you know, the fashion word is digital twins, and we believe in that. And we are looking forward to do this integration in this framework. And for doing that, again, we are not alone. We are working very closely with the ocean observing, with the data sharing, and this is us, the Ocean Prediction DCC, and again, very closely with our friends at the different decade actions towards this digital ecosystem as described in the Vision 2030 documents. So as conclusions, we are working in close collaboration with our decade partners to promote ocean forecasting and its application during the decade. Certainly a key piece of this is the best practices and the architecture, which is also best practices on how to build an ocean forecasting system. Our community, that is the one that is going to be using this, is organized around the regional teams that are now active and working. And the first result of this effort are visible. The architecture will be published this week. Very close, I hope that before Paris OP24, we will have the operational readiness level. We have, I did not speak of that, an atlas on the ocean forecasting systems available around the globe that is growing steadily and very well. We have more than 100 systems already on board and many other things to come. So please have a look to our webpage, register at our community, and be a member of our community at UN Ocean Prediction DCC. Thank you very much.
Enrique, thank you very much for that visionary presentation. I think each of the speakers in all of the panels, or both of the panels that we've seen so far, have really brought some focus to what we're trying to achieve here and have rendered some very, very practical, usable, and applicable ideas of where we can go from here. As we migrate now into our discussion panel, I do want to take a moment to thank Johannes Karstensen, who has been readily standing by, thank you, Johannes, in the event that my shipboard transmission was not able to carry, and fortunately it has been. The weather is very calm here for the present. I was worried a little bit that we might not be able to hold on. I want to thank Jay Perlman and the other contributing collaborators, Virginia as well. Thank you so much for all your help in preparation. So now, if I can, after thanking our 3 panelists of the second session and the 3 panelists of the first session, we're going to move on into our discussion. And I think we have everyone lined up here for an appropriate level of brief introduction and readiness to discuss. Let me just count the boxes here. And we may have more people than I was prepared to actually introduce here. So I'm just looking at the panelists now, and I think each of you has appeared in a manner that you have been introduced to the forum. So without burdening our time, because I think the discussion is very relevant, I'm going to dive in without repeating introductions here, if you forgive me. So if we look at what we've discussed here, and the very purpose of this panel is to look at ocean knowledge, what do we know, and the policy of how to develop and further that ocean knowledge. I think one of the first questions I'd like to raise and hear from panelists, and if I can, just physically, please raise your hand so that you can have the floor. I think that would be the easiest way to do this. But if you believe that we need an ocean policy, I think the predominant question is, do we have one? We have a global system of volunteers. We have what I would consider the coalition of the willing. And if we compare our being in the ocean field to the meteorological field, where there's an international treaty that compels the submission of observations, we have a way to go here. And I would be interested in the views as we go through a series of questions here, how you think each of the panelists might have an idea to contribute. Just really, where are we, and how can we develop a more firm, perhaps even less than voluntary, but a more compelled delivery of the observations we need to make in order to have the kind of ocean forecast system we need. So let me just look here. I do believe, at least with introducing Paula. Paula, I think you might not have had an introduction yet, and I know Anya hasn't, so I beg your pardon both. Just a brief introduction. Paula comes to us with the commercial firm of FUGRO. I'm a fan of Kongsberg. I'm a fan of FUGRO. I'm a fan of this public-private partnership. I think it's wonderful to see this emerging. And Paula is focusing on international management and governance for sustainability. And then also we have Anya Waite, who is the director of the Ocean Frontiers Institute from Dalhousie University. Anya has quite an international teaching and practical level of experience on multiple continents, and has had residence in US, Australia, and Germany in the course of her professional undertaking, and certainly very much involved in international research, teaching, and now developing multiple ocean observing mechanisms for the government of Canada and beyond. Okay, I think I've covered everyone, and if there's not, please forgive me. First question. We're trying to create an intellectual market for the needs that we want to provide. Most people, whether they're an insurance company, whether they're a banker, whether they're a farmer, most people don't know where their forecasts are coming from. Is there a way we could do better than what we are doing while we're concentrating on trying to build a better and more informed global suite of observing systems? So does anyone have any ideas or comments to make? Do the users of all this information know where it's coming from? Any ideas? Okay, I'm looking for those hands. I'm going to rely on Joaquin, because he's always a man of deep and well-focused thought. Joaquin, I think you and I have had conversations about this on occasion. Any thoughts you want to share to kick this off?
Okay, just very quickly, I think my thoughts would be that if we are inefficient, which is basically the word I would say, because inefficient in the sense that we're working a lot, but we are not really reaching one of our goals, which is to have really society understanding what you're mentioning. So I think what we have is to align our goals, to try to unify goals. We have too many goals, This is not well perceived by society. And then the second point I would say is that we need partners. We need to do partnership with other key players. Industry is one, but listening more to society from the beginning. The scientist we have been, all of us, me the first one as scientists, we have been too much only focusing on scientific production, which is what we have been requesting. And we have done well this, but this today is not enough. And we have to do more, and we have to engage with society from the beginning. And it is through this engagement that we will be able to build trust. And if we build trust, then is when we are secure. Thanks.
Joaquin, thank you. I appreciate you kicking it off, and we've sparked a few hands here. So I didn't see the order that you came in, so I'm just going to go based on where we are on my screen, if you forgive me. So Emma, would you like to go?
Thanks, and I'm going to touch upon one of the things that Joaquin raised. I don't think there's one silver bullet, Craig. I think we have to operate on several different levels. One of them being on advocacy. I think that it's, for example, with the World Meteorological Organization, many of those meteorological services know that they rely upon ocean information, but they're not distributing that necessarily to their customers. So our service, some of our service providers, even the ones that are more mature areas, are not sort of speaking up for the need, perhaps strongly enough, for ocean observations. And we're working with WMO at the moment to be included as part of their, we are included as part of their rolling review of requirements. So working deeper into the visibility mechanisms through to member states of the World Meteorological Organization in this process. But these take time, so deeper and better partnerships, having some expectation that those service partners will speak to the need for ocean observations and know that that is a role that they need to play, I think is important. I would add, in touching a little bit where Joaquin was going about working with users in his presentation, and also you saw this with INCOIS. For other services, we need to be making sure that the information that's reaching the users is what they need in this co-design process. And so co-design I see as an important feature. And finally, working with more and different partners in the, for example, the work that that Pierre was showing, and also that we sort of work with the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Observing, sort of working to discuss and talk about ocean observations and the needs for the future in the spheres where they talk, and their associations. So I think we need some more resources in the centre, or more clear definition of how these axes would all work together. But I don't think it's just one solution. Okay.
Thanks, Emma. And I'll go now to Anya.
Good morning, everyone, and hello from Thanksgiving Monday here in Canada. I just want to say how much I enjoyed all the presentations, and you all touched on really, really important issues. I think one of a couple of things kind of jumped out at me, and one is there's generally a discussion at the end of each of the presentations that says we need to do more. And I think we need to be super careful about that, because actually the ocean community cannot do more than it's doing right now without a massive influx of investment. Because I think we're all at capacity. We're all volunteering on multiple international panels and teaching and training and thinking, and it's all great. So that was the first one. The second one is, we within this community, I think this is probably the 6th time in the last 2 months that I've had this exact conversation with different sectors of the international ocean community. And so we are all in violent agreement about what we need. I think what we're not in agreement, a little bit to Emma's point, and also to some of the things that Joachim was mentioning, is we do not yet have a really crisp way of moving that forward. And I loved Pierre's discussion of some of those challenges and how we can move them forward. So, at COP26, Nigel toppings, accused nations of being limited by the narcissism of small differences. And I think we in the ocean community also can suffer from this, where we each have our own little agenda and our tiny slice of funding, and we're driving forward. And where do we fund that important connectivity work that's going to allow us all to come to a single sort of solution, so that we can push forward on one solution rather than 16? And even, to be honest, I loved Alison's presentation, but 10 priorities? No, we need 2, 1 even. And I wonder, and that's, I'm just being a bit provocative here, because I think this is the time to do it. And finally, I love the mention of an international treaty. So I think GOOS has done enormous heavy lifting in the conversation globally, and they continue to push forward. One of the questions in my mind is, do we need an international treaty for ocean observation for climate? And if we don't have that, what is the clear strategy to move forward with the WMOs, to integrate into the WMO? So I think we need an either or. Like right now, we're kind of talking a lot in the decade, and we're talking a lot to the IOC, but and we're looking at how we might and building that relationship with WMO, and it's getting stronger. But how do we actually come to an ocean policy without an international treaty? And I think this is where, the wisdom that's clustered under GOOS is in a great position to think about, what sort of international treaty do we need? Is it the one that WMO is already under, or is it something new? And then let's communicate that, and let's advocate strongly across all our networks. I'll leave it there.
Anya, thank you very much. Anya, I neglected to mention that you were a co-chair of GOOS as well, and I want to thank you for the work that you did at that time and continue to do. Maybe the people on this call are the people who should start the authorship of promoting and projecting the idea of such a treaty. It's been discussed for a long time. I think it would be worthwhile to put some thoughts together. But let me bounce back to Pierre, because I think, Pierre, your presentation raised a whole lot of these attributes that need to be considered, and possibly how to affect those attributes. Pierre, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I could add to many of the things that were just said, but what Anya just mentioned, she said maybe focus on one. I think it would be one to start with, right? I mean, we should pick out one and then at some point continue with others. But I think what was mentioned here, and what was also highlighted by Frank's comments and this connection with WNO, I mean, we all understand that we need to professionalize that whole ocean observing activity more, get it a real mandate, and there this example of the WMO is obviously on the horizon. I think what this also implies is that everybody accepts the role of GOOS and supports the role of GOOS, and let's say positions him or herself behind GOOS, right? This is so important also for the public perception, to have a common way into that field, and that is very, very important. I also think that you would need an institution like GOOS to have these very political discussions, that these long processes that were just mentioned, right? You need some entity that speaks that language, that is out there, that is linked to these other institutions on that layer. So we have to put trust also in GOOS there, and really bring that forward. But what I would like to conclude on here is, I think for the public perception, we need to further harmonize, further simplify, and make our case clearer and much easier. We saw on many slides like 50 logos of different institutions. Nobody understands that. We need to have a simple way in, like, oceanobserving.org or something like this. And then it should go down, 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 down. And best practices are a central puzzle piece in there. Other institutions are as well. Everybody plays their role in there. But we must understand that we need to be perceived as, in a simpler way. And the ocean enterprise concept was especially driven by that idea as well. If you are going to be, we also need a workforce, right, to handle all of that going forward. And if somebody was asked in 10 years from now, where are you working? And you would say, I work in the ocean enterprise. People should understand, okay, this is like automotive, this is like IT, this is the ocean enterprise. So no matter whether you work there as a scientist or in industry or as a modeler or as a service provider, you are contributing to the economy that is linked to ocean observation. And that is very helpful, and it's in the interest of all of us. So this simplification, this clarity really makes it easier in connection with ocean literacy, of course, which is very important. And I think society is also very eager to pick these things up. I mean, the environmental awareness, the concerns that are out there, they play towards us, right? They are in support of what we are doing. So young people search for jobs with purpose, and so on and so on. So that is all in support of us. And yeah, we need to organize ourselves better and simplify our appearance towards the people that are not in our community, I think.
Pierre, thank you for those thoughts. And once again, I appreciate your approach to this. It's very, very easy to distill. Henning, I owe you an apology. I didn't give you an introduction. And Henning hails from the Institute of Marine Research in Bergen, Norway. I'm delighted to be here at sea with a couple of your colleagues who have experience at the Institute. But Henning's a program director for the North Sea ecosystem and has had experience throughout GOOS and other components thereof. So Henning, your thoughts, please. Most welcome.
Yeah, I think thank you for the introduction, and I hope you have a nice cruise there. So, but I think Per is raising a very important point here. So we have to be more easy to understand, and that make it a bit thinking on that we have to do our homework in the countries itself. If we are looking for the nice logos which were shown in the presentations, there's 45, 50 logos. We have to somehow collaborate more in the countries to bring a better input, a better streamlined input to, for example, to all the excellent work which Emma has provided us with the GOOS activities, or if Per is saying the ocean enterprise, we have to somehow be more defragmented in the observation providers. So we have to streamline the nation inputs, and we have to focus on that as well, not only from the large international point of view, but also we have to do our homework from the nations. That was just one idea.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're solidifying around a couple of thoughts here, just based on that one simple question, which allows our speakers to unpack a lot of the additional thoughts that you have here to offer. So one of them is pretty clear, that we have too many priorities. We need to focus and disaggregate some of the efforts that we have ongoing here. One of the further thoughts that comes to mind for me is the simplicity of observing that we've come quite far. We're a frustrated community because we've not gone far enough. I think, as Anya said, we're all taxed. We are using the resources that governments and occasionally philanthropy might make available to us. But as another sell point for the future and the potential of this, whether we're talking about digital twins or whether we're talking about enhanced observation networks, what is the sense of this panel as to how well we're doing now versus how well we could do? We have a lot of technology available today. We just don't have the distribution and availability of that technology. So could someone or several of you offer an opinion of how much better, particularly among our forecasters that are with us here, how much better could we do if we were able to close the gap between the resources available to be applied to the technology that we do have today? Does anyone think we're as good as we can get? I'm thinking not. I see Patricia shaking her head. No, I don't think so. I see several people giving that reaction. So how far do you think we could go based on where technology is today, which then leaves the logical question of why aren't we farther along? I think you're hitting those. But wait, how much better could we get before we even develop new technology? Anya, go ahead. First hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, look, I think it's really clear we can go much further. The GOOS Ocean Observation Co-Design Program is one of the key areas, I think. Have we lost Emma? That's too bad. It's one of the key areas, I think, where we need to kind of double down and invest, because that's a place where we're pulling together a lot of different conversations. And co-design, in my view, is one of the critical pieces to getting everyone together at the same table. I'd also just like to mention two things. Like I think it was a great comment from Henning about let's look at the health of our national system. So two things I noticed on some of the maps that were put up. First of all, CEUS, which is entered GOOS a few years ago, wasn't on the map. And second of all, the Decorated Collaborator Center of the Northeast Pacific, which has now died a very big death, was on the map. So I think we need to be very cognizant that this is a moving landscape. For example, and that we need to be pulling in as much as we can. We need to think about what is the appetite for big fundraising, because if you look at the DCC, for example, in the Northeast Pacific, that was hinging on a single individual, a philanthropic organization in Western Canada, who overnight, for reasons that are still not 100% clear to the rest of the community, pulled his support from the DCC, fired everyone, and now we don't have one. So we were actually trying to build a DCC for the eastern part of Canada based on that same model. And now that looks like a very kind of poor choice, right? So I think we need to think carefully, how do we support financially the ambition that we have, and who should be supporting it? Because right now we want to pull in early careers, but we're asking them to volunteer over and over again. And we need to actually support the work that we want them to do and the engagement they want them to have financially in order to have a really rich and productive long-term conversation, and to make sure that we pull in ocean professionals in a constructive way.
Thank you, Anya. Pierre, next, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was just mentioned by Anya as well. What we often see is we mingle the terms of development of new technology and the application and operationalization of existing technology. And that is also a little bit in what you said, Greg. So let me explain that again. There are established technologies, maybe also described in some of the best practices, that can be rolled out and used in a much larger environment. But due to the fact that funds are limited, and due to the fact that we live under various constraints here, very often new technologies need to be developed. And then we have aspirations and hopes that new technologies can deliver a better job, but we never really rolled out existing technology at a really large scale. I think the only example that we have is a little bit of Argo, where we really saw how the product prices dropped, how much data we could collect simply by having various manufacturers work towards that one standard platform, so to say. And so I'm making the case here for being very clear on when we move ahead with an observing system, it would make sense to have a certain structure. Like I just imagine a number. 60% of the funding goes into maintaining existing technology and make sure that we continue our time series and work to existing standards. And 40% go to new developments, things that are very promising, and making sure that they run in parallel to the established technologies, etc., etc. So that parallel progress of new developments and research, in addition to the real operation and the large-scale, highly efficient work that mustn't be done by scientists. Maybe it could be like a real service provider who does that type of work, which is like really the operationalization of collecting data. I think that is a very important aspect. And private-public partnerships, the collaboration between academia and industry is also very important. And for that, we need to highlight our common goals and have an open discussion. Nothing should happen behind closed doors. All should be like really open, really transparent, such that everybody can see what is talked about and such that we can unite the advantages that both sectors have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Enrique, next up.
Yes, I don't know how well we are doing. I know how much we are trying. And certainly, as somebody said here, we are stretched to the limit in our effort, considering our resources. And I want to add one point to the discussion here is maybe we don't reach farther is because we are not asking the right questions to ourselves. Maybe we need more time to stop and think if we are advancing in the right direction with respect to the questions that we are trying to solve. If the questions that we are trying to solve are with depth in terms of science content, depth in terms of socioeconomic impact, because sometimes we are using too much of our time of adding one layer after another of coordination, and we are using many time of the most experienced people in the community in things that are sometimes redundant and sometimes are even done before. So I think that we have really the point where I think we have to really improve is in stopping down a little bit, raising our head and checking out if we are asking the right questions for the needs that we have today.
Thank you, Enrique. Paula, welcome.
Thank you. I want to pick up on a point that Per mentioned in terms of public-private partnership and data. So we should not only focus on having new technologies to acquire new data, but also focus on already existing data that has not been shared to the public yet. So this is work that is ongoing, but for example, the private industry sits on a large amount of data that they have collected for their own project in the past. These projects have been finalized and then the data sits on their shelves. So I think if we would work further and improve the accessibility to this already existing data, that will also already open up a large chunk of what we're looking for that we could then use to employ these new technologies to collect the still missing data that we do not have yet. So also an important point to take into consideration.
Paula, thank you. I think many of us are aware of the efforts that many companies are undertaking, and certainly wish you the success, understand the complication in the relationship between a client and then the holder of those data. But I applaud those efforts, and I think we need to be creative in how we can support and do more than that across governments as well. Joaquin, if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to be positive this time, and I basically think, yes, we're doing well, but actually we're doing well because most of the funding comes really from research organizations. So I think we're doing well to respond to what we are requested originally. And we are not doing well to do what we think we should be doing. I know it sounds stupid, but I hope you understand what I mean. And basically then I think I would like to come back to what Anya mentioned about the international treaty and about how we can really move forward from research-based funding that tries to do something else, and then becoming every one of us, as Anya also said, overloaded, etc. And I think definitely, as Pierre and Paula just mentioned, I think through public-private partnership, I think this is definitely something that would reach out much better to society. But the present situation is that, yes, we're doing well because we are actually doing what we were supposed to do from research funds and something else. The problem is that the something else is not really being funded appropriately, and we don't have the resources to do this. Thanks.
Joaquin, you raise a very good point here in terms of where the support has come from. Whether that money is then allocated to government or private sector, the funds seem to have been finite, number one. Number two, no great inspirations to increase that pool of funding. So that's a communication issue that we have to work on. But you raise a really important point here. Some of the global ocean observation system is funded by research budgets. Some are funded by meteorological budgets. And probably too few are funded by institutional ocean operational budgets, or operational oceanography, as the term was rendered in the first half of the panel. And I think we need to focus a little bit more on that. Until you get operational, you don't really have a steady state support. So as we look at those observations, is there currently a model that anyone sees that's in use by basin or by nation or by region that is working, where these attributes that we're raising seem to have been addressed, and there is an effective and productive operational ocean forecast system that starts with the measurements through the analysis, forecasts, products, and then delivery and dissemination to the public. Is there a model that exists right now that we can look to as a best practice itself, rather than the restaurant menu of all the different components that we could be picking out? Once again, let's get back from how many priorities do we need to have versus maybe is there a model out there that we could look to and say we need to be more like that one? And I don't want to embarrass anyone who is managing some of those, but we'd love to hear from you. So Anya, you have your hand up first. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to challenge us and say we don't actually have a system like that yet in the ocean system. We have pieces of it which, if brought together, could look like that. But where there have been really successful projects like that has been actually in space science. So the International Space Station and the International Black Hole Telescopes have a system where nations and policy experts and technical experts come together in an international steering committee, and all the, for example, let's say black hole telescopes, they all take their data, put it into one place, which is then turned into information products and disseminated back out to the black hole telescope nations. So there are systems that work. They have quite clear governance, which includes governments and actual experts, like research experts. And I think we can look to them for the space station. While it's a bad example of North-South collaboration, it's a good example of across basin, across the Northern Hemisphere collaboration, because basically everybody came together, invested in their big piece of infrastructure. I remember when Canada put up their little Canadarm to go on the space station, and then the insights and the pictures and the data that flow from that go to all nations that support it. In fact, they go to all nations. So I think there's ways to look at those and see what positive aspects of those systems could inform how we want to go forward in the ocean observation space.
Very healthy suggestions. Thank you very much. Enrique.
Yeah, I think we have advanced a lot in the last decades in this direction. I would like, for example, to highlight the example of the Copernicus Marine Service. Not everything is integrated there. So the observations are just integrated there, but they are independent, as you perfectly know. But you have maybe constructed by different contributors, both inside and outside what is the core service, that is the Copernicus Marine Service providing. You have the whole thing working from the observation to the downstream services to the final user, sometimes in ways that only 10 years ago could look a little bit like science fiction, I have to say. So I want to send a positive message here, saying that at least we know how to build the things, and we have a path to follow. It's true that it's not fully integrated. It's true that the observations, especially the observations, are many times relying on projects and are not sustainable, which is a big problem. But you have a template there on how things could go.
Thank you, Enrique. Yeah, the conversation has really brought out what we need to be focusing on, doing more of, that maybe we don't have that single existing model right here. And maybe we have too many priorities, we need to narrow them. Given that we have about 7 minutes left, I'm going to pick up on where we were, that we have too many priorities, and maybe we should focus on fewer of them. So may I invite each panelist and anyone who's on here who hasn't had a chance to speak yet as well. What should we do? What is the perhaps single most important thing that we should do? I'm sorry, Per, did you have a contribution to that last tail of the conversation? Or is it addressing the thought that I'm raising now? Sorry, Per, check your mute, please.
Yeah, it was about the question. No, go ahead with your final question. Let's do it easier. Go ahead with your final question.
Okay, if you could roll your views into that. Yeah. Okay, friends, we have a challenge here. What's the single most important thing that we could do?
I think if I just continue here, the question that I wanted to raise was, how much should we use data that is linked to commercially mature information to pull other data sets along? Because if I look at fishery data, for example, if I look at survey data of bathymetry, of waterways, etc., these are extremely mature markets. There is a healthy environment around it. There is value behind it. If I look at this work that ICES has done over the 40 years, like sustainable stock assessment, like sustainable stock management, there is something behind that. And we could use this to really help us to get money in and funding to lift data that is not yet as mature as that to also reach a better level. And yeah, that being said, so I think referring to this helix concept, if we are perceived as having same goals, working collectively towards those goals, having a healthy relationship between academia and industry, educating a new workforce, having purpose in our concepts, dealing with our resources sustainably, etc., etc. If we can have this image and work towards that image collectively, then I think also politics will consider that and support that more, and we will have more support, and that would also be helpful for us in then going these next steps towards kind of a WMO appreciation, but also weather forecast, right? How many private services do we use in that context, and how much is really only state funded? I think there is kind of a healthy relationship there already, and without that, I fear that it will be difficult to reach the goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you, Per. Enrique.
Yeah, I think if I have to define in one sentence what we should focus on, what we have somehow not been very successful in doing in the past, is to lobby, to demonstrate the importance of ocean monitoring and forecasting. We know how important is this, but maybe we have not been very efficient in moving this to the political level, especially, because it's the only way to understand why is it today so unstructured and so poor, the funding that we have for certain aspects. So we really need to be more efficient on our lobbying to send the message that we know very well on the importance of the ocean forecasting and monitoring.
Thank you, Enrique. Patricia.
Thank you. I would like to add, and it picks up with the last question, where we were looking at how we find the balance between using new types of data with traditional methods and in relation to ocean best practices. I believe it is important that we document and endorse practices that already exist with those ones that are creating new methodologies. So looking at harmonizing and standardizing and the convergence of these practices may lead to have more global data sets with long-term data to answer these new questions that we are foreseeing.
Thank you, Patricia. Would anyone else like to offer a concluding thought here on the subject of what is the one thing that we should be doing? We have good suggestions here. Paula, go ahead, please.
Yes, picking up the topic of sharing data again. I'd say one of the main things that need to happen is to incentivize and motivate, or perhaps even make it mandatory for organizations, be it private industry or any other organizations that collect data in territorial zones, for example, or exclusive economic zones, to make that data publicly available. And perhaps making it mandatory would be a step, a very actionable step. Of course, there's a topic of client relationships to consider, etc. But further down the line, once projects have been finalized, for example, that could be one aspect. So with that, increasing also the relationship and the partnership between the public and private sector. And on the other hand, also have the government support sharing data as well. Because one thing is a private industry, for example, being willing to share the data that they have collected. But once they want to do that, the process doesn't get very much easier from there. So every coastal nation has its own process on how data can be shared. It seems quite straightforward, but it actually is not. So also facilitating these steps would make it would also, I think, improve the whole situation. And a further smaller point, which is not the biggest priority but should be considered either way, is also to involve the youth and early career. So early career ocean professionals, ECOPS, for example, the program under the Ocean Decade, I think that is incredibly important to include, to also take on the legacy of, for example, the Ocean Decade in the future.
Thank you, Paula. Okay, I think the last two then will be Joaquin and Anya. Joaquin, would you go first, please?
Thanks very much. I will just comment some of the examples that Anya mentioned, the space station, etc. To me, they are clear. One of the things why I say they are clear is that they provide one common goal. So I will insist about the fact that we need one common goal and work together towards this. The example to me, I have been recently more or less close to the America's Cup in Barcelona that you all probably follow or know. And the advances are amazing. They are incredible, but they work all together for a common goal. We only see the final outcomes, that's like in Formula One racing, but the teams behind are incredible, are amazing. So I think we need to convince key stakeholders, key philanthropists, key ocean companies, research organizations about really the need to consider ocean observing as a similar need for us and the future generations. And that would be fully aligned with the international treaty that was mentioned before, etc. But I think unless we define one common goal and see how we can work all together towards this, we will be seen and perceived as dispersed and each one looking at its own little interest. Thanks.
Thank you, Joaquin. Anya.
Yeah, thanks, Joachim, for those wise words. I would just say we all need to be advocating relentlessly outside the ocean observation community, because it's still not understood what GOOS does. OBPS, we don't necessarily all know about it. Every time I talk to a government stakeholder, they're surprised at how much is done at GOOS and how much the community has achieved without really any major funding. So that communication about what the global ocean observing system does, how important ocean best practices are outside the observation community, I think would be a critical thing for all of us to do. If we all have one or two conversations, that's already 20 just based on this panel, for example.
Anya, thank you very much. And I want to say thank you to each of the panelists who has joined us here. Thank you for the value of your thoughts and your contributions. A couple of ideas, excuse me. Had to hit the TV broadcaster's cough button, sorry. A couple of ideas come to me in distillation. One is, as fast as we are now moving, are we content to have an Ocean OBS global meeting every 10 years? Might there be a new rhythm that we need to establish to move this forward? It's not just an ocean best practices issue, but it's certainly to the mainstream of our being. Secondly, the instrument that we heard in discussion of having a compelled rather than a voluntary aggregation of ocean observations, the ability to try and transform through governments operational oceanography, not just research or meteorological installations. There's a lot here, friends, and you've really brought these issues up. And then finally saying, amongst that recipe, which has many other components in it, what's the one principal thing we need to be working towards? And my recommendation would be that it be high level rather than into the detailed eclectia. But there's a lot here. We're working towards a common goal. The public sector, the private sector, philanthropic contributions may come and go depending upon striking the interest of the sponsor. But as long as there's a business interest, the commercial sector is going to be here, and the two companies that are represented here, and also I appreciate the mention of the Marine Technology Society for their contributions, is really what's going to help us get to a better sense of organization. So thank you all for your thinking, your contributions. I want to thank George for inviting me and Jay Perlman for inviting me to moderate here. I do want to apologize. Mine is the only image screen that is backwards. Everyone else's is facing forward, but this is coming from a guy who's retired, and I chose to retire on April Fool's Day. So there we have it. Thank you very much, and thank you to each of the panelists. George, over to you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Craig. Yeah, excellent session. Really excellent. Really enjoy it, and thanks all the panelists and the members. There are some questions in the Q&A that please, if you feel that you want to respond, please do. And we're moving to the last part. I give the floor now to the organizers, Vinny and Stefania, for any logistics before we close.
Thanks, George. First, I want to thank you to all keynote speakers and panelists for your valuable contribution to this first day of the OBPS workshop. You provide us with very interesting presentation, highlighting the needs to contribute to these dialogues across science and technology, and from all part of the ocean data value chain through scientific excellence to answer the society's need, to provide innovation solutions to key challenges that we're all facing: climate change, response to natural and anthropic threats, and much more. Identifying actions and priorities that define the pathway to 2030, but also to fill remaining critical gaps in ocean knowledge. And to achieve this challenge, collaboration across sectors as well as co-design is key. And no one is working alone, as lots of you mentioned. Additionally, all highlight the importance of best practices across systems and the ocean information value chain, from technology and observations to data users and production to key information, as well as the evolution, maturity, and endorsement process of best practice. Also, thank you all of you online for your attendance and participation. We collected very interesting questions that confirm the interest and the need of ocean best practices. And the next 3 days will consist of a series of sessions covering a diversity of topics around best practices, from ocean observation to ocean forecasting systems and models, and from social needs to support ocean objectives, to advancement in technology for next generation of observing network and role of cloud computing, to enhancing ocean governance and strength connections with international communities for capacity building. So today's session will be running across time zones. Some of them are in parallel, and you can check the team up calendar. The link in the is normally in the chat. More general information about the next 3 days workshop is available on the OBPS website. The link should be available now in the chat. Thank you, Stefania. And finally, do not miss the last plenary on October 18. We organized 2 sessions, one at 4 UTC and one at 16 UTC. Please mind the time, with distinct chairs that will help to summarize the main outcomes of the workshop and the visions of the OBPS community. Again, all information is available on the OBPS website. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. See you in the next sessions. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Goodbye.